The Crystal Prison, Book 2 of the Deptford Mice trilogy by Robin Jarvis, read by Martin Shaw. It was a hot day in Deptford. A terrible stench hung over the housing estates. On a building site near the river, the air was thick and poisonous. At the edge of the site, next to the river wall, was a mouldering heap of yellowing newspapers. It was here that the stink began. One of the builders came trudging up, and his worn, tough boots paused at the newspaper mound. A scuffed toe nudged some of them aside. Beneath the papers was the rotting body of a horrific giant cat. Jupiter was dead. The evil lord of the rats had met his end weeks before in deep, dark sewer water. For some days Jupiter bobbed up and down in the sewer passages, until with a rush of water he was flushed out into the River Thames. One night a terrible storm blew up. The wind and the rain lashed down from the sky, and the river became swollen and crashed against its wall with shuddering violence. On one thundering wave the cat's body was hurled over onto the building site. The builder who had found him seized a great shovel caked in cement. With a grunt, he lifted the sagging corpse into the air. Jupiter's massive claws dangled limply over the sides of the shovel, and what was left of his striped ginger fur blazed ruddily in the sunlight. The builder stepped carefully over to the site bonfire and tossed Jupiter into its heart. For a while the fire glowed purple, and then with one final splutter there was nothing left of the once mighty Lord of the Sewers. Oswald was ill. As soon as the white mouse had returned from the sewers, he had felt unwell. When the small group of mice who had confronted the terrifying Jupiter had emerged from the grill and climbed the cellar steps, Oswald's legs had given way. For weeks he had stayed in bed, and his mother, Mrs. Chitter, fussed and scolded him. Bit by painful bit, he became more frail. Then, one day, Mrs. Chitter could take no more. As she was carrying away the soup that Oswald had been unable to swallow, the bowl fell from her paws, and she fell heavily to the floor, soup and tears everywhere. From then on, Gwen Brown took charge of Oswald and his mother, whilst Twit the field mouse looked after his uncle, Oswald's father. It was silent in the skirtings. The empty old house was filled with quiet prayers for the Chitter family. All the mice helped as much as they could, and offered food and blankets. Gwen Brown's own children, Arthur and Audrey, collected the donations and messages of goodwill, and it was the job of a grey mouse from the city called Piccadilly to keep everyone informed of Oswald's condition. All the mice owed a great deal to this small group of friends. It was they who had finally rid them of the menace of Jupiter. No more did they have to dread the cellar and the strange grill, which was the entrance to the dark, sinister rat world. The cruel rats had been killed or scattered, and a mouse could sleep soundly at night, fearing no sudden attacks or raids. Piccadilly swept the hair out of his eyes and got out of bed. "Arthur," he whispered to the snoring bundle across the room, "wake up." He shook his friend gently. The plump mouse on the bed stirred drowsily. "How is he?" he asked. Piccadilly shook his head. "Oh, I've just got up." "How was he last night when you left him?" "Bad." Arthur swung himself off the bed. "Mother doesn't think it will be long now," he sighed. "Will you stay here afterwards?" The grey mouse sniffed a little. "No, I've made up my mind to stay just until, he coughed. "Then I'm off back to the city." "Oh, we'll miss you," said Arthur. "I won't know what to do around here when you've gone. I think Twit's decided to leave as well, afterwards." Arthur turned to stare at the clear blue sky outside, and then remarked casually, "I think Audrey will miss you most, though." Piccadilly looked up. "Well, she's never said anything." Well, you know what she's like. Too stubborn to say anything. I know my sister, and believe you me, she likes you a lot.
Well, I wish she'd tell me.
Oh, I think she will when it suits her. Let's fetch her and go and see how Oswald is. Audrey was already up and waiting for them. She had not bothered to tie the ribbon in her hair, as she usually did, and it hung in soft chestnut waves behind her ears. They knocked on the Chitter's door. The curtain was drawn aside, and the small features of Twit greeted them solemnly.
"He's still with us," he whispered. "But your mum's all in."
"I'll tell her to lie down for a bit," nodded Arthur. "And I'll take over," added Audrey. "You look like you could do with the rest as well, Twit. Piccadilly, put Twit in Arthur's bed."
"Oh, thank you,"
Twit stammered through a yawn, and he followed Piccadilly back to the Browns' home. Arthur and Audrey slowly made their way to Oswald's room. Arthur coughed quietly, and their mother came out to them. "Hello, dears," she breathed wearily. Dark circles ringed her brown eyes, and her tail dragged sadly behind her. "Come on," said Arthur. "You're going to get some sleep." You would hear no protests, and Gwen Brown was too tired to make any. Audrey watched them leave, then breathed deeply and went inside. Oswald was quite still. His face was gaunt and drained, paler now than ever before. His fair albino hair was stuck close to his head, and his whiskers drooped mournfully. Next to his bed on the wall was a garland of dried hawthorn leaves, which he had saved from the spring ceremony. He had adored the celebrations, and was impatient for the following year, when he would come of age and receive his mouse brass. To Audrey it seemed long ago that she had taken hers from the very paws of the green mouse. She thought of him now, the mystical spirit of life and growing things. How often she prayed to him to spare Oswald. Now it looked as if nothing could save him. "Good morning, Oswald," she said. The albino raised his eyebrows feebly. "You never got your mouse brass back," he murmured. "Yes, I did, for a short while. You were so brave getting it for me amongst all those horrible rats." A gentle, polite knock sounded. Audrey crept away and made for the entrance.
"Oh, it's young Miss Audrey,"
said sturdy Thomas Triton when she drew the curtain back.
"I was expecting your mother, but if you aren't the very one anyway."
The midship mouse pulled off his hat and asked gravely,
"How's the lad this morn?"
"No better, I'm afraid. We don't think he'll last much longer. Mother's resting just now. She and Twit have been up all night."
"Aye," muttered Thomas grimly. "I like that field mouse. Reminds me of someone I knew once. Best friend I ever had."
A soft footfall made them both turn sharply, but it was only Arthur. "Hello, Mr. Triton," he said politely. "Audrey, I think Piccadilly's having trouble with Twit. He needs to rest, but won't settle. He can't stop worrying."
"Right. I'll get him out of that," said Thomas firmly. "Come with me, miss, and I'll see to my young matey."
The midship mouse strode from the Chitter's home with Audrey following. "Mr. Triton," she said, "what did you mean before, when you saw me and said I was the very one?"
"It wasn't just to see how poor Oswald was that I came," he explained as they entered the Browns' home. "I've a message for you."
She looked blank as Thomas Triton charged into Arthur and Piccadilly's bedroom.
"Ahoy there, matey," Thomas said sternly to Twit. "What you doing lying in your bunk on a day like this? Get up, lad, there's folk to see."
"Who's that then, Thomas?" asked Twit, curiosity banishing the weary lines around his eyes.
"Why, the star wife, lad."
Twit's eyes shone with excitement.
"What?
Her that lives in Greenwich under those funny buildings I saw when the bats flew me over?"
"Aye, matey. First thing this morning I had a message from herself delivered by one of her squirrels."
He turned to Audrey.
"The Star Wife wants to see you, Miss Brown, and she won't be kept waiting. I've come to fetch you, and me laddo here is welcome to join us."
Thomas Triton led Audrey and Twit down the cellar steps and through the cellar to the grill. Wrought in iron with twirling leaf patterns, this had always been an object of fear and dread. Audrey shivered as she stood before it, recalling how she had been dragged through it by an evil band of rats.
"This is the quickest way to Greenwich,"
said Thomas, squeezing himself through the rusted gap at the side. Audrey and Twit crawled through the gap after him, and down into the sewers they went. "Tell me about the Star Wife, please, Mr. Triton," asked Audrey.
"She'm the grand dame of the squirrels," put in Twit.
"Yes, but what can she want of me?" asked Audrey. "I've never heard of her."
"Maybe," said Thomas, "but she's obviously heard of you. She must have heard about Jupiter's downfall, wants to know all the details of it."
"Oh, what shall I tell her?" asked Audrey nervously. Thomas whirled round.
"Why, the truth, lass, and nothing but that. And don't go adding bits or leaving stuff out, or your ears'll ring for weeks after."
Audrey was horrified. Her thoughts must have showed on her face, for Thomas added,
"Oh, she won't need you. But the Star Wife has motives of her own. She never does nothing for nothing. Sometimes she can be as subtle as Jupiter himself, and that's what I'm puzzled about. So I say again, just watch yourself."
They had come to the end of the sewer journey, and a small passage lay before them, at the end of which bright sunlight streamed through the holes in a grate. Thomas led them down it, and they followed him to the outside world. The mice stood outside Greenwich Park. Before them the green lawns stretched away up to the observatory hill. The three mice made their way up the hill, and presently the observatory buildings drew near. How high they were, with their onion-shaped domes and solid walls. They sat proudly on top of the hill, fringed by railings and thick rhododendron bushes.
"Look," called Twit suddenly. "In those bushes there. No, it's gone now."
"What was it?" asked Audrey.
"A squirrel. There it was, staring straight at me, grey as ash, then poof! It darted away as speedy as anything."
"How long do you think it had been watching us?" asked Audrey. Thomas glared into the bushes.
"They've been keeping an eye on us ever since we stepped into the park. Thought they were being clever, but I spotted them a-spying and jumping from branch to branch over our heads. Like a spider in a wide web she is, gathering news. You'd be surprised at what she hears."
Audrey twisted the lace of her skirt between her fingers. "Mr. Triton," she began nervously, "I don't want to see her. Please, can we go back?"
"No, lass," Thomas sighed. "She has summoned you, and you've come this far. Courtesy must be kept, and you never know, maybe the old boot's mellowed since I last saw her."
The midship mouse ducked under the railings and scampered up the bush-covered bank. Audrey and Twit followed. Above their heads, amongst the leathery leaves, nervous coughs were stifled. Audrey glanced up. "What are they doing?" she murmured fearfully. Thomas Triton stooped and sat down in the mossy shade of the dark-leaved rhododendrons.
"This is where we have to wait till one of them plucks up enough nerve to come down and lead us further. Could be hours."
"But we can't wait too long, Thomas," urged Twit, thinking of Oswald. The midship mouse eyed Twit for a moment.
"You're right, matey."
He sprang to his feet, and then in one swift movement snatched a small stone off the ground and flung it up into the canopy of rhododendron. A surprised yell came from the leaves, and with a crash of twigs a grey lump dropped to the ground. cried the furry bundle in panic.
"Peace, squire," cried Thomas. "We have no time for your formalities today. Forgive me for speeding up the proceedings. Yeah, but... The squirrel began. 3? There are 3 of you. We thought there'd only be 2. She won't like this. She won't like this. Not at all. No. That's enough, rapped Thomas. I'll face whatever squalls she throws my way, but we'll not sit here be calmed by your dithering. Lead us and have done. The girl first,
instructed the squirrel timidly.
The mouse maiden is to follow me.
Audrey followed the escort's bushy tail as it bobbed before her. Through lanes of leaves it led her, under arches of twining roots and past startled squirrel sentries who disappeared in a flash of grey. Suddenly a great oak tree appeared, and the escort vanished down a dark cleft in the trunk. The base of the trunk had been hollowed out by years of squirrel labour. Small wooden bowls hung on the walls filled with burning oils. The light they gave off was silver and flickering, illuminating the smooth-worn oak with gentle dancing waves. Down narrow passages the mice followed the squirrel. After a short while they came to a richly embroidered banner hung across the width of the passage. The background was a dark blue, and over it was stitched a field of twinkling stars that reflected the light of the lamps around them. The escort paused and bowed before the banner, and a strong, impatient voice snapped from the other side. "Bring them in, Piers. Stop dawdling, boy. Show in the midship mouse first." The squirrel jumped in fright.
"Oh, madam, forgive me."
"Triton," called the voice,
"Come in here."
Thomas straightened the red kerchief around his neck and strode through the banner. Audrey held on to Twit's paw as they waited for their turn.
"So, seafarer," said the voice, "it has been a long time since I last saw you in my chamber."
"Yes, ma'am," came Thomas's awkward reply.
"Too long. The fly has kept away from the web as best he might. But now you could say that the old boot is on the other foot."
Audrey gasped. How did the Starwife know that Thomas had compared her to a spider and an old boot? The Starwife's voice dropped to a whisper, and Audrey could not catch what she was saying. Then a loud, sharp knock brought her up quickly.
"Bring in the field mouse,"
called the Starwife.
"I'll teach him to tag along when he's not invited."
"Master William Stutter,"
announced Piers, the escort.
"Scuttle,"
corrected Twit angrily as he pushed past.
"So, country mouse,"
greeted the Starwife.
"You have come to visit me, have you?"
"If it please you, your ladyship."
"It pleases me not at all," she snapped back. "Who are you to presume a welcome in my chamber?"
"Please, ma'am," said Thomas, "it's my fault. I brought the lad. He needed the break. Times are bad in the skirtings."
"Enough! Piers, fetch the girl."
Audrey smoothed her lace collar and stepped into the Starwife's chamber. After the cramped tunnel, it was like walking out into the open, it was so spacious. Suspended from the high ceiling were hundreds of small, shiny objects, coloured foils, metal lids, links from silver chains, and polished pieces of glass. For a moment Audrey thought their pattern familiar, but could not place it until she realized that they represented all the constellations of the heavens.
"Come here, girl, where I can see you."
The Starwife was an ancient squirrel perched on a high oaken throne, carved with images of twisting leaves and acorns. Age seemed to smother her. Her fur was silver and patchy, and her muscles were wasted, falling in useless rolls beneath fragile, dry bones. Her eyes were a dull grey, and over one of them was a thin white film like spilt milk. Around her neck hung a silver acorn, the symbol of her knowledge and wisdom. In her gnarled, crippled paws, she held a stick, and it was this that Audrey had heard knocking on the wooden floor. "How do you do?" Audrey asked, dropping into a formal curtsy. The star-wife made no reply, so Audrey repeated herself, a trifle louder than before. The ancient squirrel shifted on her throne and sucked her almost toothless gums.
"I'm half blind, girl, but not deaf yet."
She gazed at Audrey with unblinking eyes and sniffed the air. Audrey did not like the star-wife one little bit. Rude old battle-axe, she thought to herself. She remained silent under the continuing stare, until the silence became embarrassing for her. "Excuse me," she began, "but we can't stay long, I'm afraid." The star-wife gave a wicked chuckle.
You must think me a rude old battle-axe," she said calmly.
Audrey flushed. It obviously wasn't safe to think in front of this creature.
"I do have manners, but it's so rare that I find anything worth practicing them on. You must forgive me, child."
"Why did you send for me?" Audrey asked.
"There are two reasons, Miss Brown. Firstly, I desired to speak to the one who sent Jupiter to his doom. Tell me all you know and all that happened on that glad day."
Audrey breathed deeply, not sure where to begin. Then she recounted all that had happened to her since one-eyed Jake had dragged her through the grill up to the time when she had thrown her mouse brass at Jupiter. When she had finished, she stepped back and waited for the other to comment.
"A dark story you have told, Miss Brown, with more horror than you know. And now you shall know the other reason why I brought you here."
She banged the stick on the floor for the young squirrel.
"Bring in our guest,"
she told him. Piers disappeared.
"It's over a week ago now," she began, "that our sentries spotted someone skulking in our park. Her ribs were like roots poking through the soil, and her belly taut as a bark drum. She had not eaten for many days."
"So, who was she?" Audrey broke in. "What did she want?"
"She wanted nothing, but I made her drink some milk, and with that some life seemed to return to her dead eyes. I questioned her, but could learn very little. In fact, Miss Brown, you have told me more about my guest than she has herself."
"I have?" Audrey could not believe it. Slowly, a vague suspicion began to dawn on her.
"Yes, for she is known to you."
Audrey's heart was fluttering with apprehension and dread. Behind the banner, coming down the passage, she could hear Piers returning. His quick, nervous footsteps were unmistakable, but alongside came a clumsy flapping of large, ungainly feet, and with them a voice.
"Oh, got to see squirrel boss lady, oh yes."
The banner was thrust aside, and Piers scampered into the chamber, followed by Madame Akikuyu. When Audrey had first met her, Madame Akikuyu had been a fortune-teller who also dabbled with poisonous love potions. But she had always craved genuine magical powers, and that is how Jupiter had corrupted her into his service. It was Madame Akikuyu who had delivered Audrey to him. Then she had still been a striking figure, her fur a rich, sleek black, and her eyes dark and fathomless. But now, her skin hung baggily off her frame, and her fur was molting away in ugly patches. Only the tattooed face on her ear looked the same. Around her shoulders she still wore the old spotted shawl, and strapped about her waist she carried her pouches of dried leaves and berries. In one large bag was her crystal ball. Madame Akikuyu stumbled up to the throne and grinned sheepishly up at the star-wife. With a shock, Audrey saw something terrible dancing in the rat's eyes. Madame Akikuyu had lost her mind.
"Welcome, Akikuyu," said the star-wife. "There are friends of yours here."
The rat gazed distractedly at the mice. She did not recognize the sturdy one with the red kerchief around his neck, but then she hardly knew anything any more. Her head was in such a muddle these days. Her memory was as patchy as her fur. She knew the crystal ball and the pouches of leaves were important to her, but she did not know why. She looked at Twit. The face of the little field mouse stirred nothing in the jumble of her memories. Finally she turned to Audrey and froze. Yes, she had seen that young mouse before, somewhere. A confused array of images crowded in. Then an overwhelming sense of guilt washed over her. As she continued to stare at the mouse, her own voice spoke to her from the past. "Mouselet, you, me, run away. Leave dark places, hide, and be happy." A tear rolled down Akikuyu's sunken cheek. What had happened to that wonderful plan, she wondered. That was what she wanted now, to go away and have peace in a quiet spot where the sun shone. Swallowing the lump in her throat, she said, "Mouselet, Akikiyu know you. Why did we not go to the distant places and sleep in summer sunlight?" Audrey felt uncomfortable. She knew why. The rat had been taking her to Jupiter when this idea had first gripped her. Akikuyu would have escaped with her when Morgan, Jupiter's hench-rat, had interrupted them and Madame Akikuyu had been forced to carry out her orders. The star-wife tapped her stick.
"Akikuyu,"
she began.
"You have been my guest for 9 days now and are free to remain. Yet I sense that there is a yearning in you, and you feel you are unable to stay here."
The fortune-teller bowed her head. "Oh, wise boss lady, you see into Akikuyu's heart." She closed her eyes and clasped her paws in front of her as though in prayer. "You so kind to Akikuyu. You give food and shelter when others throw stones. Akikuyu never forget you, sweet bushy one. But Mouselet and me, we special. She and I promise. We go away together. We friends." Audrey spluttered and lifted her head. But the glitter she saw in the star-wife's eyes silenced any outcry she might have made. Gently the old squirrel held out one arthritic paw to the fortune-teller.
"Peace, Akikuyu," she said. "You shall go with your friend, but first you must make ready. Go now to your room and prepare."
"Yes, yes, Akikuyu, go at once," chuckled the rat gleefully as she ran away from the chamber.
When she had left, Audrey turned to the star-wife angrily. "That was the cruelest thing I've ever seen," she stormed. "Why did you build our hopes up like that? What will happen when she finds out that I'm not going anywhere with her?" The stick began to tap the ground slowly.
"She will not find out any such thing for one simple reason. You are going with her."
"Ha!" Audrey laughed. "Not on your life!" The stick crashed down.
"Silence!"
raged the star-wife.
"I will not be spoken to in such a manner."
Thomas Triton stepped up beside Audrey and put his paw on her arm.
"Take care, miss," he whispered. "She can make you do anything she wants."
He turned to the old squirrel. "Ma'am," he began, "where are they going to go, the rat and this girl? And how are they to get there?" The star-wife pointed her stick at Twit.
"This lad was about to go home before his cousin fell ill. What better place for Akikuyu than a remote field to spend the rest of her days in?"
Suddenly Twit piped up. "But I can't go yet, missus. Poor Oswald."
"The chitter boy will die before this day is out," she said.
The field mouse cried out in dismay. "Oh, how do you know? It might not."
"This I have seen,"
snapped the star-wife.
"Look behind my throne. Behold the star-glass."
The mice peered around the carved oak throne, and there, as tall as 3 mice, was a flat disc of black polished glass set in a carved wooden frame. Over its surface, silver flashes flickered, and in its midnight depths swirled a multitude of vague and distant images.
"It is my life,"
explained the Star-Wife quietly.
"and it has been the life of every Star-Wife before me. With it, I have looked into the heart of the rat Akikuyu and found no evil. That is why she must be taken away from this place."
Audrey thought for a while. Finally she said, "I am truly sorry for her, but why must I go?"
"Because she will feel safe with you. Somewhere in her mind you have become linked with this notion of safety in the sun. She will go with no one else."
"I'm not going anywhere with that rat," said Audrey. "No one can make me do anything I don't want to." The Star-Wife tapped her stick and called for Piers.
"Madam?"
he asked eagerly.
"Fetch it, Piers."
Piers bowed and dashed off. The Star-Wife tilted her head and smiled at Audrey triumphantly.
"So, there is nothing I can do to make you take Akikuyu away?"
"Nothing," answered Audrey firmly. Piers came bounding back. In his paws he carried a small cloth bag tied tightly at the neck.
"Thank you, Piers,"
said the Star-Wife.
"Help me down now. Mr. Triton, could you take one arm and Piers the other?"
The midship mouse rushed to help. Carefully they eased the Star-Wife off the great chair. Her face screwed up as her old bones creaked and the stiff, dry joints ground together noisily.
"Thank you,"
she said to both of them, when finally she stood on the floor.
"Now the star-glass. Come along, young Scuttle. It needs the relative."
She hobbled slowly with her stick to the rear of the throne until she stood before the star-glass.
"Stand in front of me, lad," she told Twit, "and take this in your paws."
She gave him the cloth bag and placed her own paws on his shoulders.
"Now hold your arms out straight. That's right."
She whispered under her breath, and the silver lamps on the walls grew dim and went out. Only the flashes over the black glass lit the chamber, and as the Star-Wife chanted, the light grew brighter. Twit opened his eyes wide as he witnessed the strange squirrel magic happening before him. From the depths of the dark glass he saw the night sky, only the stars shone 100 times brighter. Presently the light from them gleamed stronger, and the stars drew nearer. Twit gasped. It seemed as if the whole sky was about him now. In a blaze of blue and silver, the stars leapt out of the glass and whirled all round. The chamber had vanished, and only he and the Star-Wife were left amid the burning heavens. Twit heard the Star-Wife's voice calling into the sky and felt her old paws on his shoulders. Suddenly, the bag in his paws grew heavy, and all the starlight seemed to be sucked down into it. At the same time, he felt 2 sharp pains in his shoulders as the Star-Wife gripped too tightly. A fierce tingling sensation shot down his arms. The tingle travelled to his paws, and then seemed to enter the bag.
"Enough!" cried the Star-Wife. "It is done!"
She released Twit and blew on her paws as if to warm them. Twit blinked. He was back in the chamber again, and the lamps were lit once more, but the star-glass was dark and impenetrable. The Star-Wife turned to Audrey and said,
"Before I told you to take Akikuyu away to young Scuttle's field. Well, now I am asking you, will you take her?"
"I've told you, nothing will make me go," Audrey said.
"What if the life of your friend Oswald depended on it?"
Well, that's unfair. Oswald's ill. Nothing can save him." The Star-Wife interrupted with a fierce striking of her stick. "Wrong!" she shouted.
"What is now in that bag can restore his health."
Twit looked at the bag in his paws. "Really, missus?" A broad grin spread across his face. Piers had been trying to get the Star-Wife back to the throne, but she pushed him away from her and pointed the stick furiously at Audrey.
"If,"
she cried. Audrey did not understand.
"You may take that bag away with you and cure your friend and his parents, only if."
Then she knew. "You mean, if I agree to take Akikuyu away?" The Star-Wife nodded. "So if I said no, even now, you wouldn't let us take that bag away with us?"
"The bag would be useless. The bargain must be kept."
"But I made no bargain," Audrey protested. The Star-Wife regarded her coldly.
"I made the bargain, child. I always do."
Audrey thought of poor Oswald lying on his bed, perilously close to death. Then she saw Twit's little face turned expectantly towards her. "I have no choice, then," she said. "I will take Akikuyu to Twit's field."
"I knew you would," replied the Star-Wife. "Piers, show them out. The audience is at an end."
In the passage, Twit asked Piers, "What does I do with this bag?" "Steep it in hot water, and when it is cool enough, make him drink." And that is the end of side 1. In Oswald's sick room, excitement charged the air. Thomas had told Gwen about the Star-Wife's bag, and she had prepared a bowl of steaming hot water. Twit dropped the bag into the bowl. At once the steam snaked higher and filled the sick room completely. Small stars gleamed through the steam. All who breathed it in felt refreshed, and tingles ran all the way down their tails. Twit took the bowl and knelt beside Oswald. He used one paw to raise his cousin's head, and tilted the bowl slightly with the other. At first, the water simply touched Oswald's lips and trickled onto the pillows. Everyone held their breath and watched. More of the precious water spilled onto the pillows. The albino looked dead. Twit feared they were too late. The pillow was very wet now, and there was not much left in the bowl. "Oh, Oswald!" the little field mouse cried. "Oswald, Oswald!" And then Oswald's lips moved. "Look!" yelled Twit. "He be drinking!" Oswald swallowed the liquid, and then opened one eye feebly. He gazed at them all, and managed a smile. "Hooray!" shouted Twit, skipping round the room. "Hooray!" Thomas stepped up to Audrey and said softly, "I'll be off to Greenwich later to return the bag. No doubt I'll be told details of your departure. She won't leave anything to chance. Everything will be planned and organised." "Oh, Mr. Triton, I have to go, don't I?" said Audrey. He nodded regretfully. "Alas, miss, I'm afraid you do." Miserably, she dragged her feet back home. Arthur was munching away in the kitchen and getting crumbs everywhere. "What's the matter?" he asked. "Didn't Mr. Triton tell you? It's the miracle cure of the Star-Wife. We could only take it if I agreed to go with Twit to his field, and take Madam Akikuyu with me." "Audrey? Oh, that's terrible. I thought the rat woman was dead." He put his arm around her. "But don't worry, sis. I'll come with you, I promise. How long do you think it will take to get there and back?" "Oh, but that's just it," wept Audrey. I shan't be coming back. I've got to stay with Akikuyu forever.
Arthur gasped.
But that's dreadful. But how shall we tell Mother? I don't know,
sobbed Audrey.
Oh, my dears.
Mrs. Brown was standing in the doorway, tears falling down her cheeks. She had heard it all. She wrapped her arms around Audrey and kissed her.
If it's all right with you, Mother, ventured Arthur, I'd like to go with Audrey to make sure she's safe. I don't need looking after, said Audrey. Just you stay here with Mother.
Listen, silly, argued her brother. I can go with you, make sure you settle in, then come back and tell Mother how you're doing.
Oh,
said Audrey. She could see the sense in that. So could Mrs. Brown.
That's a very good idea, Arthur,
she said, and hugged them both tightly. In the hall, the other mice had not been idle. To celebrate Oswald's return to health, food had been brought out and decorations festooned the walls. It was a joyful chaos of noise and laughter. Soon the tensions of the last weeks were forgotten by everyone except Audrey.
Where's Piccadilly?
She asked suddenly. It occurred to her that he knew nothing of the bargain. Perhaps he would come with them to Twitsfield. It might not be so bad after all if the cheeky city mouse came too.
Piccadilly was over there with the dancers,
said Mrs. Brown. Audrey went in search of the grey mouse. The musicians were playing Cowslip's Folly, a lively dance in which a ring of boy mice rushed round a central circle of girl mice and chose a partner from them. Audrey hovered at the edge of the dancing. She saw Piccadilly choose Nell Poot 3 times. Miss Poot was evidently enjoying all the attention, and she was brazen enough to wave at Audrey. At first Audrey was amused. Everyone knew how dotty Nell Poot was. But when Piccadilly chose her a 4th time, the smile twitched off Audrey's face, and her foot began to tap bad-temperedly. What did Piccadilly think he was doing? Cowslip's Folly ceased, and Piccadilly sauntered over. "Do you want summat?" he asked. "Only, Miss Poot thought you were trying to get my attention." Audrey answered casually, "Well, yes, I did, as a matter of fact. I just wanted to say goodbye to you and to take this opportunity to thank you for all you have done for me and my family." "What, you gone soft in the head?" laughed Piccadilly. "What you on about?" "I'm leaving," said Audrey. "Arthur and I are going with Twit to his field on a visit." Piccadilly's face fell, and his shoulders drooped sadly. Audrey bit her lip and cursed her stupid tongue. "I see," he muttered, staring at the ground miserably. "Well, hope you have a nice time. When was all this decided?" We decided as soon as Oswald got better," she said. "You can come and wave us off if you like." Piccadilly stared incredulously and then said, "Well, sorry, ducks, but I'm going back to the city tomorrow." "Oh," gasped Audrey. "Well, White is better now, ain't he, and there's naught to keep me here, is there?" "I suppose not," said Audrey in a small voice. She wanted to tell him of the terrible bargain that she had to keep. "Piccadilly," she began. "Oh, here, listen to that," he said, cocking one ear to the band. "That's the Suitors' Dance, and I promised Miss Poot." The city mouse left her, and Audrey's eyes pricked with wretched tears. When Audrey awoke next morning, her mother handed her a note. It said, "I've gone back to the city. Thank you for having me. I've took some biscuits. Hope you don't mind. Piccadilly." She ate her breakfast dismally. Arthur was unhappy too. He had begun to consider Piccadilly as his best friend, and he guessed that Audrey had something to do with his abrupt departure. To cheer himself up, he went to see the Chitters. Oswald was propped up in his bed with a great smile on his face,
as Twit told him funny stories. "Twit says he's going home, and that you and Audrey are going too. I'm so jealous, Arthur. I wish I could go too." Arthur's mother popped her head into the sick room. "Arthur, dear, and Twit, could you step out here for a minute, please?" Outside, they found Thomas Triton.
"I've come from the Star, wife," he said. "You leave tonight. Seems there's a merchant chappie she's persuaded to take you to my young matey's field."
"A merchant mouse?"
asked Twit. "Aye, lad. He's a sort of peddler. Sells and trades things. Seems he knows everywhere along the river."
Mrs. Brown had been frowning. Now she suddenly said, "Would this peddler be Mr. Kemp?" Thomas looked surprised.
"Why, yes, ma'am. You know of him."
"He comes here in the autumn to see Master Oldnose on mouse-brass business. He seems respectable enough. I think I'll feel a lot happier knowing my children are in his paws."
Just so, ma'am. Well, as for tonight, I shall lead me lad over here and your two children down to Greenwich Pier, where Kemp will meet us. There we shall all wait until the rat arrives with those fidgety squirrels."
The rippling river was dark, and Greenwich Pier huddled over the lapping water like a tired old lady. There were no lights on the pier at night. All was dim and grey, a place of alarming shadow. All the mice were carrying bags packed with provisions, blankets, and personal treasures. Audrey's arms ached with the weight of hers, and she was glad when Thomas said it was not much further. She watched Arthur and Twit run ahead to explore the deep pools of darkness, and shuddered. After some moments they came rushing back, their faces aglow with excitement.
"Thomas!"
squealed Twit eagerly.
"There be summat up there. We done heard it."
From the shadows came a great clanking noise, as if some metal monster had been roused from sleep.
"Are you the party for Fennywold?"
came a hearty voice.
"That's right,"
Twit piped up.
"That be the name of my field."
The clanking drew nearer, and into the dim light stepped one of the strangest figures Audrey had ever seen. There was a mass of bags, pans, straps and buckles, mounted on a sturdy pair of legs, and somewhere amongst all this madness was a furry round face and two small bead-like eyes. It was friendly and welcoming, and Audrey warmed to Kemp immediately, staring in fascination at his bags. Poking through the sides were glimpses of fine silks and silver lace, and hung around the handles of his pans and around his own neck were beads of every type and variety. Thomas introduced everyone to the traveller.
"Oh, what a fine party we'll be making, to be sure," said Kemp. "Sailing up the river together, leaving the fume of the city behind us. And you, Mr. Triton, sir. Sorry I'm not to have your stout company aboard. I bet you know many a worthy tale. I'll wager we'd not get bored with you on hand." "Oh, I don't think you need worry on that score, Kemp, my boy," smiled Thomas. "Have you met your other travelling companion yet?" "Well, no, that's the truth of it. But I had word from herself what lives up on yon hill, the batty old squirrel." What did she tell you exactly?" asked Thomas. "To be here tonight to guide certain parties to Fennywold, there being your own good selves and one other, special lady. But now you mention it, herself made me give my traveller's oath not to change me mind. Ain't that funny now?" He looked at the mice before him and grew concerned at the expressions on their faces. "Why, there you go, worrying a body. Kindly tell me who the lady is." But even as he spoke, Madame Akikuyu strode onto the pier, followed by two squirrels. "Mouselings!" cried the rat, dropping her many bags and flinging her arms open. Kemp's face sagged. "Why, the batty old she-devil!" he bellowed. My traveller's oath and all. For this lump of a rat, I be conned outright.
One of the squirrels braved a reply.
The bargain must stand, otherwise all the river will know of your falseness.
The traveller stood still, but his face looked as though it would burst.
A traveller depends upon his reputation. Why, if his traveller's oath is doubted, he goes out of business. Just so, replied the squirrel smartly.
He stroked his tail smugly and glanced casually around for his silent comrade, but he had already run away. That was enough. The squirrel jumped in the air and dashed after him. Thomas Triton turned to Twit.
Well, matey, he said awkwardly, there's no denying I'll miss your cheerful face round here. Ever since you dropped on my ship, we've got on famous.
He fumbled with a flask that was slung over his shoulder and thrust it into the field mouse's paws. "What is it, Thomas?" asked Twit.
Just a little something for your journey, and to remember our first meeting by.
He cleared his throat and hurriedly waved.
Well, cheerio.
The three young mice sadly watched him go.
Well, Kemp began, I'll show you our trusty vessel.
"Are we to leave tonight?" asked Audrey.
No, missy, said Kemp. The boat set off in the morning, but we've got to settle down. I shall be near my mousy friend, declared Madame Akikuyu, stooping to collect her things.
Audrey looked at Arthur and grimaced. Kemp took them further along the pier to where a large tourist cruiser was moored. It bobbed gently up and down, bumping against the pier.
There she is, said Kemp. Our transport. Well, one of them anyway. Now, up this rope here, and we'll be on deck.
Easy, cried Twit, and scampered up the mooring rope in a twinkling.
Akikuyu do that also.
The fortune-teller hauled herself onto the rope bridge and clumsily made her way along with her thick tail flicking behind her. It was Arthur's turn next. He stared at the rope warily. I'm not usually very good at balancing, he admitted. I can climb, but, He looked despondently at the sloshing water below. From the boat, Twit laughed.
Come on, Arthur. If you spend any time in my field, you'll have to learn to climb stalks. But I suppose you'd have to lose weight first.
I'm not fat, protested Arthur.
Oh, no, of course not, you great puddin'.
That settled it. Arthur virtually ran up the rope and began scuffling with the field mouse, who was helpless with giggling. Now it was Audrey's turn. But she stepped onto the rope nimbly and was soon aboard, straight into the welcoming arms of Akikuyu.
Clever mouselet. Akikuyu, no mouselet could do it.
Whistling a quick tune, Kemp ambled up to them with perfect poise on the rope, his many goods not affecting him whatsoever.
Now, follow me, fellow travellers, he said.
They strode over the boards and between wooden benches to where a steep flight of wooden steps plunged darkly down into an invisible blackness.
Down here,
called Kemp, briskly jumping onto the first step. Silently, they all descended. Twit followed Kemp, then Arthur, followed by Audrey and Madame Akikuyu, brought up the rear. When they were at the bottom of the steps, Kemp lit a candle, and they looked around them. It was a storage hold. Oil drums and tarpaulins surrounded them. Thick black ropes snaked across the floor, and a stack of folded wooden chairs was piled precariously in one corner. It smelled strongly of the river and of stagnant, neglected pools.
This is where we bunk tonight, said Kemp.
Audrey didn't like the hold. It was stuffy, and more like a prison than anything she could imagine. The small flickering candle flame brought no cheer to the gloomy place, and the rocking of the boat made her feel sick. After putting her bags down, she climbed the steps once more. She leant against one of the railings along the deck and gazed up at the bright stars. The sloshing of the water and the motion of the boat lulled her senses, and the rich green smell of the river was brought to her on the breeze. She closed her eyes, and a calm descended on her.
Mouselet.
Audrey jumped. Akikuyu had followed her from the hold. The rat's black eyes were gleaming.
The night, she is beautiful. See the stars, how they burn.
She raised her claws to the heavens and spun round.
Oh, Mouselet, she cried. Finally we are together, and we shall never be parted.
Turning to Audrey, the rat added,
Akikuyu have many treasures, Mouselet. Things she not understand, powders in pouches, leaf and herb in bundles, secret packets that do smell most strange, and a terrible trophy of a kitty head.
She frowned as she looked into the swirling water, as if all her answers lay there.
What they all about? Why for Akikuyu keep such grizzlies? Was she doctor to have bowl for pounding and mixing? The darkness is behind Akikuyu, too black to see.
Her voice trailed off as she sighed with regret. On impulse, Audrey said, Don't worry. Leave the past alone. Look to the future, Madam Akikuyu. There will be answers enough there.
Oh, Mousy, how good it is for you to be such a friend.
The fortune-teller grabbed Audrey, and because the mouse pitied her, she did not struggle as the other hugged her tightly. Large rat tears ran down Audrey's neck. The field was a large one, a mass of green corn rippling like the ocean as the wind played over its surface. It was bordered on one side by a deep ditch that fed a pool at the far end where the hawthorn grew thick and impenetrable. But now, in the hot sun, the ditch was dry, and the mud at the bottom was cracked and studded with sharp stones. Along the side grew tall elms and one solitary yew, dark giants rearing high over the swaying grasses and stretching into the fierce blue. To the left of the ditch was a meadow, rich in the glossy show of buttercups and flowering grasses. Beyond the meadow was a clump of oaks fully in leaf. This small land was what the field mice called Fennywold. It provided them with everything they needed, an abundant supply of corn, berries from the hawthorn, water from the pool, and brambles for the autumn brewing. In the winter, the steep banks of the ditch provided excellent shelter, and there were numerous passages and tunnels under the roots of the elms, secret holes to hide from the bitter winds and escape the midwinter's death. During the summer, it was usual for the mice to move out of their tunnels and take up residence in the field. But this summer, the inhabitants of Fennywold had remained in their winter's quarters. Only during the day would they venture into the field, and woe betide any mouse not safe in the tunnels at dusk. A terror was hunting in the night. Alison Sedge sauntered through the meadow lazily. Her strawberry blonde hair hung in two creamy ponytails behind her ears. She was a curvy young mousemaid, with an impish pout and large brown eyes. At her breast a mouse brass dangled, a sickle moon with a tiny brass bell, the sign of grace and beauty. And this was the trouble. Alison had received the charm a year ago, and it had gone straight to her head. She flirted with the boys, flicking back her hair and flashing her eyes at them, promising sweetness. They had all fallen for her. Todkin, Hodge, young Wortle, and skinny Samuel had been victims of her careless, dangerous glances. Those slight tosses of the head and devastating grins had been practised and scrutinized in the mirror of the still pool where she spent most of her days preening and rehearsing her powers. It was clear in her mind that she had no equal anywhere. Jenkin was carrying a large bundle of dry wood, and felt like throwing it into the ditch. He was tired and fed up. His father made him work hard.
"Waste not the hours the good green gives,"
was just one of the rules drummed into him. Suddenly, his mouse brass reflected the sun full into his downcast eyes. He dropped the sticks and rubbed them. For a moment he was blinded. It was a brass of life and hope, a sun sign. His father, a local mouse brass maker, had forged it specially with him in mind, and was gravely pleased when Jenkin managed to choose it from the sack 2 springs ago.
"Oh, there, Jenkin,"
came a clear voice suddenly.
"Why for you rubbing your eyes? Do I dazzle you so much?"
Jenkin blinked. As his eyes readjusted through the misty haze of light, he could just see Alison strolling towards him out of the meadow. Her fur was a fiery gold, and there was buttercup dust glittering on her face. In her eyes there were dancing lights. Jenkin eyed her. She had certainly changed in the past year. Why, before she had been given the mouse brass, they had been firm friends. He even thought that perhaps...
"Like my flower?"
she asked huskily. "Look better in the ground," Jenkin replied. "Why don't you go show Hodge?"
"Oh, I may,"
Alison answered mildly. It amused her to flirt with the boys and see how she set them at odds with one another. An impatient voice rang out over the field.
"Jenkin, where are thee, lad?"
Jenkin jumped up and hastily retrieved the bundle of sticks. That be my dad calling for me." Isaac Nettle stood stiff and stern outside one of the entrances to the winter quarters. He scowled as his son came panting up to him.
"Where did thee get to?"
he snapped.
"Idling again, I'll warrant. Come here, boy."
Jenkins set the wood down before his father and watched him warily.
What's this?"
bellowed Isaac.
"The wood is green. How am I to burn that? We should choke on the smoke."
He grabbed his son by the neck and raised his hard paws to him.
"I'll beat sense into thee yet, boy, and with the green's help, I'll cure thee of thine idleness."
From a safe distance, Alison watched. She sighed and told herself that she must make sure to be kind to Jenkin the next time she met him. Why, she might even let him kiss her. Samuel Gorse was close to tears. He held on tightly to his friend and tried to pull himself further under the oak root. It had been a magnificent day. The morning had been so fine that he and young Wortle Knepp had planned an adventure. Warty, as Samuel was fond of calling his friend, was always full of terrific ideas.
"The oaks, Sammy," he had said. "We shall quest the oaks and see what secrets they keep."
So off they went. They had charged through the piles of last year's leaves and had played hide-and-seek behind the roots. Then young Wortle had suggested they attempt to climb.
"But, Warty," Samuel had protested, "shouldn't we be getting along now?"
Bags of time yet. Sun ain't low enough to think on going back. Come on, give us a leg up."
So up an oak tree they had climbed. It was gnarled, knobbly, and ideal to climb. Footholds were plentiful, and there were lots of low branches to run along and swing from. Then Samuel had noticed the hole.
"What's up there?"
he had asked. "Looks like some sort of big gap in the bark."
Higher they had clambered. Samuel had been determined not to look down, and had kept his eyes strictly on his paws. Eventually young Wortle had drawn near to the hole.
"Seems like the tree's hollow here," he had called down. "Oh, wait for me."
Samuel had pulled himself up to his friend's side. Together they peeped over the brink of the hole. Inside all had been dark, but their sharp eyes had picked something out of the gloom. Something terrible. Samuel shrieked and nearly fell off the tree. Here in the oak was the frightful thing that had kept the field mice below ground this year. A large and fearsome barn owl. Quickly young Wortle and Samuel ran down the tree. They slid and slithered, scraped their knees, and broke the skin on their paws, scurrying down it. As young Wortle jumped from the lowest branch, a great shadow fell on him. Quickly he yanked Samuel to the ground and ducked under one of the roots. Seconds later, sharp talons scored the ground where they had been. Now, here they were, two small frightened field mice, cowering in terror from a dreadful enemy.
"Be it still up there?"
asked Samuel in a tiny voice.
"Aye, Sammy. Probably sat on one of them low branches just a-waiting for us to make a move." "Oh, Worty!"
whimpered Samuel. Young Wortle patted his friend on the shoulder.
"I got me an idea," he said. "If I throws a stone yonder," he pointed behind them to a patch of ferns and bracken, "it might just fool Hooty up there long enough for us to make a dash for them hollows full of leaves."
He picked up a good, paw-sized pebble and threw it for all he was worth. The ferns rustled and swayed as it crashed through them. "Now!" he hissed, grabbing Samuel by the arm. The field mice darted from under the root. Samuel ran as fast as he could, too terrified to look up, in case he saw the owl rushing to meet them, talons outstretched. And then they were at the hollows, and with one leap they dived into the heaps of dry leaves.
"It worked!"
Samuel cried. His heart was racing, and his ears flushed with excitement.
"I told 'ee we would have adventures today," said young Wortle. "Now we'll tunnel through these leaves till we're at the point closest to the meadow. Then you just run like crazy."
Samuel gulped nervously.
"Lead on, then," he said.
In the leaves they almost believed that it was autumn again. The smell of the dry decay was the very essence of the season. The leaves crackled over and beneath them as they pushed their way through. Suddenly there was an explosion of leaves, and twilight shone down on them.
"Oh, he's dive-bombing us!"
wailed Samuel.
"We'll have to zigzag and hope he misses us,"
shouted young Wortle. They dashed from side to side. The owl tore into the leaves close by and gave an angry hoot at finding his talons empty.
"Oh, mouses! I'll get you all!"
he bellowed furiously. He dropped like a stone and skimmed the surface of the hollow with his talons, churning up leaves and twigs in the chaos of his wake. Samuel and young Wortle managed to dodge that onslaught, but only just. Samuel lost the tip of his tail, and the pain was terrible. Blood poured out of it and made him feel sick. Young Wortle was near to panic himself. He dragged the wilting Samuel towards the meadow, and how they managed he never knew. Samuel had lost a lot of blood and kept swooning, but fear kept them going, and suddenly they were in. They stumbled and staggered along through the tall grasses, flinging themselves to the ground, when they felt a shadow pass overhead.
"Mouses!"
called the owl.
"Mahout sees you!"
A dark wing swept over the tops of the grasses, and a talon grasped young Wortle by the shoulder. He squealed in pain as Mahout landed and drew him near to his waiting beak.
"Ah! Ah!"
screamed a strange voice.
Ah!
A stone came flying out of nowhere and stung Mahout right on the beak.
Ooh! Ooh!
He began ferociously. He unfurled his wings, but kept a tight hold on young Wortel. Great clumping footsteps came rushing towards them. Mahout twitched with uncertainty.
Aia! Bikihota!
Came the voice.
Put down the mouselet!
Crashing through the meadow came a large rat woman with a shawl around her shoulders and a bone in her hair. It was Madame Akikuyu. Mahout eyed her doubtfully and rose into the air. He didn't like rats.
Help!
Squeaked young Wortel, dangling from the talons. The rat leapt up and grabbed the owl's other leg, bringing him sprawling to the ground with an astounded screech. Madame Akikuyu hopped onto Mahout's back and dealt him a great thump with the bone from her hair.
Let go, feathery one! Free mouselet!
The owl twisted under her and scrabbled at the ground in a bewildered frenzy. Another thwack hit his head.
Ho!
He roared. Madame Akikuyu laughed out loud, then thrust the bone back in her hair and proceeded to pluck the owl. Mocking him, she tore out large clumps of feathers and threw them before him to see. Suddenly, young Wortel was free. The talons opened, and he staggered over to Samuel, where he fell unconscious. Mahout writhed and managed to scramble upright. Madame Akikuyu flung her arms around his neck and bit deeply into his shoulder. That was enough for him. The owl let out one last hoot of pain, shook the rat off his back, and rose shakily off the ground. But not before a hail of stones and twigs battered him as Madame Akikuyu jumped up and down with glee below.
Yeah! Scaredy birdie!
She shouted, sticking out her tongue at the receding dark shape in the sky. Then she rushed over to the field mice and inspected their wounds.
Ah, poor mousies, she cooed sadly. Very bad they are.
She fumbled in one of the pouches which hung round her waist and brought out a broad-leafed herb. With it she dabbed young Wortel's punctured shoulder, and then with some more bound Samuel's mutilated tail. Then she stepped back and sat down with a bump. How had she known what to do? She looked into her pouches and knew the properties of all the herbs in it. Most of them were deadly.
Oh, Akikuyu, she gasped breathlessly. What memories are you waking?
A sound from the real world reached her ears, and she broke out of her brooding. And that is the end of Side 2. The meadow was lit by little burning torches carried by a host of field mice. They hurried towards her, and she threw open her arms in welcome. The mice came and stared at the scene before them with open mouths. There were the two youngsters lying, dead for all they knew, on the ground, and the peculiar rat woman was boldly waving her arms about. Young Wortel's parents came squeezing out of the crowd and knelt beside their son. Slowly his eyes opened, and he managed a weak smile for them. Then he lifted a finger and pointed at the rat.
"She saved us, Dad,"
he said.
"Saved us from the owls, she did."
"Thank you," said Mr. Knepp gratefully to Madame Akikuyu. The crowd cheered until she flushed with pleasure. And then, to her great surprise and delight, they picked her up and carried her on their shoulders, although it took 8 of the strongest husbands to manage this feat. Arthur and Audrey could not believe their eyes. Here they were, newly arrived in Fennywold, and Madame Akikuyu was being feted as a heroine. Everything was happening so quickly. They hadn't even had a chance to meet Twit's parents yet. "I'd never have believed it," said Arthur. "She is remarkable," said a voice behind them. They turned round and saw a field mouse sticking a feather in his hair. "My name's Jenkin," he added. "You're the ones who came back with Twit, aren't you?" "Yes," replied Audrey. She liked the look of this mouse, and he had been the first one in Fennywold to speak to them. "I'm Audrey, and this is my brother Arthur. What's been going on here?"
"Oh, an owl kept us in our winter quarters all year. We daren't go out at night, 'cause he'd catch us and eat us. But it looks like we've done seen the last of him for a while."
At the ditch, the field mice put Madame Akikuyu down, and the fortune-teller gazed about her enraptured. She could not remember ever feeling like this before. She wanted to burst with joy. By the time Arthur and Audrey arrived, she was speaking.
"Owlie not come back in a hurry. If he do, Akikuyu bite him again."
There was thunderous applause, and some mice cried, "We can move into the field at last!" and "Hooray for the rat lady!" the other voices called.
"Where be Mr. Woodruff? He's got to declare the field open."
At the spring ceremony every year, the field mice elected a king of the field. This year, the honour had gone to Mr. Woodruff. The mice waited for him, and excited expectation charged the cool night air. Audrey looked around at them. There were fat mice, thin mice, some tiny ones with large pink ears and long twitchy tails, but no tall mice, except perhaps... yes. On the far side of the crowd, Audrey saw a lofty mouse. She stared at him curiously. What a grim face he had. Idly she wondered who he was. And then, next to him, she noticed Jenkin, who, to her surprise and embarrassment, was looking straight at her. Audrey coughed and turned quickly away. She felt her ears burn with her blushes, and hoped it would not show under the torchlight. She tried to compose herself, and gazed fixedly ahead, hoping that her ribbon was tied properly. However, she could not resist having a crafty peep round to see if Jenkin was still looking at her. He was turned away, speaking with the tall mouse. But a girl mouse was glaring at her, glaring with real hatred in her eyes. Their eyes met, and Audrey gave her most insolent, pretty smile, then turned away. Suddenly a hush fell on the gathered field mice as Mr. Woodruff stepped out of the winter quarters. On his brow he wore a crown of plaited corn. He raised his paws and began solemnly.
"May the field be blessed, and may the goodwill of the green mouse follow us therein."
"Amen to that," called out Isaac Nettle, but he was drowned out by the frantic cheers of everyone else.
"And now," shouted Mr. Woodruff, "you may all enter the field."
He stood aside, and the field mice scurried past him.
"Make the hall!"
they yelled happily. Soon only Mr. Woodruff, Madame Akikuyu, Audrey, and Arthur were left standing by the ditch, and the field was filled with joyous calls and mysterious sounds. Mr. Woodruff looked at the Deptford mice and smiled.
"So, you were Twit's companions. Come, he is below with his folks. I think we can interrupt them now. You look like you could do with a good sleep. The field is no place for you tonight. The work would keep you awake."
"Please, sir," Arthur asked, "what work?"
"Ah, you'll see tomorrow, lad."
Mr. Woodruff turned to Madame Akikuyu and raised his eyebrows.
"Will you join us below, ma'am? We would be most honoured."
The fortune-teller grinned at him and came over to give Audrey a big hug.
"Ah, yes, Akikuyu come. She not leave her friend. First Akikuyu find the bags. You go, I follow."
The three mice left the rat to find her things and entered the winter quarters. Madame Akikuyu was left alone in the dark. In her mind, she relived the thrilling moments of glory and the thrill that those cheers gave her. What undreamt wonders there were in the world, and how her heart swelled with pride to think that all these mice honoured her. As a tear fell from her furry cheek, Madame Akikuyu knew that she had never been so happy before. She blew her nose on her shawl, then cast about for her bags. It was dark. The sky had clouded over, and the moon was hidden. She stooped down and groped for her things. It was so quiet. The noise of the mice in the field had died down, or they had moved away out of earshot.
Akikuyu!
Madame Akikuyu paused and tilted her head to one side.
Akikuyu!
There it was again. A distant, echoing voice calling her name. Madame Akikuyu shook her head violently.
Leave me!
She wailed.
Go away! Akikuyu, not listen!
The sun brimmed over the tops of the oak trees, and its dazzling, early rays moved slowly over the meadow, creeping towards the field. The corn seemed to stir at the sun's warm touch, and stretched as high as it could. Arthur and Audrey had never been in a cornfield before. They gazed about them with great interest.
Look, said Twit, there's Jenkin. Hi there, Jolly Jenkin. How do? He said shyly with his eyes on the ground. Where are you going then, Twit? Arthur and Audrey ain't seen the hall yet, Twit replied. I was just taking 'em there.
Deeper into the field went the three friends, until the dense corn around them began to thin out and form a corridor, the ceiling of which was made by twisting together the ears of corn from opposite walls.
This be the main way to the hall, Twit informed them. This be what they were all doing last night. Twit chuckled. Just you wait.
At the end of the corridor, Audrey and Arthur stopped and blinked. The hall of corn was immense. It was wide and long, and clumps of corn had been left standing at regular intervals, giving the impression of mighty pillars. But the hall was open to the sky. At the far end, on a wickerwork throne, sat Mr. Woodruff, the king of the field. Many field mice were bustling about, building large spherical structures halfway up the corn stems.
They be our summer quarters, explained Twit. You never slept till you spent a night in a field mouse's nest, not on the ground, but halfway up in the sky.
Audrey was overcome by the industriousness of the Fennywolders. All this had taken only one night to accomplish.
There's me dad,
said Twit, and he ran over to where Elijah Scuttle was working. He had built a good large nest for him and Mrs. Scuttle, and was in the process of completing a slightly smaller one.
How do, Willem? He nodded to his son. Thought he and Master Brown could share a nest.
Oh, what terrific!
Said Arthur.
Well, don't be making it too high, though, Dad, laughed Twit. Old Arthur can't climb too good.
No, Willem, chided his father softly. You knows I do make your mam a straw ladder every year. I'll do one for Master Brown, too. And what about you, Missy? Elijah addressed Audrey. I'm not sure if you want to kip with your ratty friend.
Oh, no, Mr. Scuttle,
gasped Audrey, horrified, until she realized he was teasing her. He grinned and said,
I'll make you a real purty nest for one, so she can't squeeze in.
Thank you, said Audrey, greatly relieved. Arthur pulled his sister to one side. I'm not going to be the only boy using a ladder. I'm going to crack climbing one of these dratted stalks if it kills me. What are you going to do? He said. Oh, I've had an idea to make something for the hall, said Audrey. Arthur regarded her doubtfully. Oh, what sort of something? A corn dolly, you know, like the ones at home in the chambers of summer in the spring ceremony. I'm surprised they haven't already got some here. She picked up some thin straws and began to plait them together, and Arthur went off to talk to Jenkin about his climbing. Audrey decided that the figure of a girl would be best, with corn ears for arms and a dress of bunched stalks. Some mouse children who had been running around stopped and watched her, and Audrey talked to them happily. Alison Sedge wandered into the hall. She was thinking about Jenkin and the look he had had on his face when he saw that town mouse, and she was in a bad mood with the world. As she crossed the hall, she noticed a small crowd of children near the scuttle's nests. And there, in the centre of all the attention, was that town mouse. Curious and irritated, Alison tossed her head and strode nearer. The dolly was now taller than Audrey. Its head was a loop of plaited straw, and she was busily straightening it, as at the moment the whole thing had an amusing, drunken air about it. Alison observed the scene acidly. She saw the admiring looks Audrey was getting from the boys who went by. Young Wortle was leaning out of the Knepp family nest, positively ogling. She regarded Audrey coolly, and then a slow smile curled over her mouth, and she spun on her heel and ran out of the hall. There, the dolly was finished. Audrey was very pleased with the final result, even though it was much larger than she had anticipated. "What's it for?" ventured one of the children shyly. "It's a decoration," said Audrey. "Will you help me to take it to Mr. Woodruff?" Eagerly, small paws helped lift the corn dolly and carry it to the wicker throne. Mr. Woodruff watched them approach with a puzzled look on his face. Audrey and the children put the corn dolly down and curtsied and bowed before him. "Please, sir," she began, "I have made this corn dolly to decorate your hall." The king of the field leaned forward to inspect the dolly. "It is most, unusual," he remarked jovially. "I wonder, could you teach our young ones to make such things?" "Oh, why, yes, sir." "Very well," declared Mr. Woodruff. A sudden commotion interrupted him. The doors of the hall were thrust aside, and Isaac Nettle stormed in. He pointed a shaking finger at the king of the field and cried, "What heresy is this? What sin have thee welcomed, Woodruff?" "Isaac," muttered Mr. Woodruff sternly, "what's all this about?" Mr. Nettle glared round at Audrey. "Pagan idolatry, brought hither by this unclean creature." Audrey was astounded at his passion. She had never seen anyone so angry before, and some of the children began to cry. "It's only a decoration," she protested. "Silence, fiend of the deep cold! Thy craft speaks for itself. It's a blasphemous effigy, and mocks the design of the green mouse. Oh, great one, do not let us pay for this misguided deed of the ignorant. She is the scum of vile cities, the cream of the sinners. Punish us not for her wrongdoing." "Now look here," fumed Audrey, her astonishment boiling to anger. But he would not listen to her. He moved nearer to the corn dolly and raised his fists to smash it. "Don't you dare!" cried Audrey, pushing herself between him and the figure of straw. "Away, profane one!" roared Isaac, shoving her roughly. Audrey stumbled and fell backwards. "Nettle!" bellowed Mr. Woodruff. "That is enough! I will not allow you to spoil the hall of corn." Isaac threw him a foul glance, but he persisted. "Listen to me. I am your king. I am the law here." "Then I shall not enter here again," Isaac roared. He snatched up the corn dolly and strode off crying, "This abomination has stunk before the green mouse long enough." "Consider yourself banished from the hall till your temper cools," the king called after him. All the field mice relaxed and muttered, shaking their heads. Then mothers came and fetched their children away from Audrey. From her nest, Alison Sedge watched with a satisfied smile on her pretty face. Night was falling. In the Hall of Corn, all was calm. Nearly all the mice had gone to bed to try out their new nests, and here and there orange lights showed through the openings as they settled down. Audrey's nest was snug and warm, and the moss which lined it was soft and scented. She closed her eyes and, breathing heavily, sank deeper into her bed. Suddenly the world seemed to quake. The nest shook violently from side to side. Audrey was jolted out of her short velvet sleep and hurled about. What was happening? She tried to cling onto the round walls and staggered to and fro, unable to keep her balance. A claw appeared over the opening, and then everything went dark.
Mouselet?
Madame Akikuyu squeezed her huge head through the tiny hole, blocking out the light.
"Why Mouselet in here?" she asked. "No room for Akikuyu to keep. Come down, Mouselet, and we sleep on ground together."
"No," answered Audrey.
"But Mouselet, little friend, Akikuyu not like to be alone in dark. Night has voices. They speak to her."
"Look," said Audrey, "why don't you go and get some sleep? In the morning you could ask Mr. Scuttle to build you a nest next to this one." But Madame Akikuyu merely stared back at her with the eyes of a scolded dog, hurt and confused.
"Come down,"
she asked one last time.
"For Akikuyu's sake."
"No," Audrey said, and she hated herself immediately. The fortune-teller stuck out her bottom lip and said suddenly,
"Akikuyu go. She sleep on ground alone, poor Akikuyu."
She pulled her head out of the nest and began to climb down again. Audrey leant out and saw the diminishing, bulky figure reach the ground. In the darkness of the hall floor, she could just make out the spots on the rat's red shawl, and they quickly bobbed away. Madame Akikuyu wandered through the field miserably. Her right ear ached terribly, and her best friend had not done anything to help. She sat down at the stony stretch of ditch and buried her head in her claws, moaning to herself. The pain had only begun when the sun set, and as the night became darker and cooler, it grew more intense.
"Akikuyu."
The rat looked up quickly. She could see no one.
"Akikuyu,"
repeated the voice. The fortune-teller wailed loudly.
"Ah, leave me,"
she cried.
"Akikuyu,"
the voice persisted.
"listen to me." "No,"
snapped the rat.
"Never. Akikuyu not want to go round the bend. Leave me." "Listen to me. Let me help you." "No! You not real. Akikuyu bar me. She a voice when nobody there." "But I am real, Akikuyu." "Who are you then?" "My name is Nicodemus,"
whispered the voice.
"I am your friend." "Then why you hide?"
asked Akikuyu, glaring suspiciously at the shadows, which seemed to have closed around her. She rubbed her head. She had seen something out of the corner of her eye, and thought it was a spider dangling from her hair.
"I do not hide,"
crooned the voice of Nicodemus.
"I am here."
And to her everlasting horror, Madame Akikuyu saw who it was that spoke to her. She screamed, getting to her feet in panic. On her right ear, the tattooed face was moving and talking. The old ink lips were opening and closing, and the drawn eyes were staring straight at her.
"Oh!"
she screamed again.
"Akikuyu is cracked. Oh, poor Akikuyu," she sobbed. "Listen to me.
ordered Nicodemus.
Trust me, you are not mad, Akikuyu. I am merely using this tattoo to talk to you. It is a channel through which you are able to hear me. I am really far, far away.
The fortune-teller ceased her sobs.
What are you?
She asked slowly.
I am a spirit of the fields. I am the essence of the harvest, the sunlight on a distant hill, the splendor of a golden meadow, the heady perfume of the hawthorn in bloom. Why you speak to Akikoyu? Because, dearest lady, I am trapped, caught in a horrible limbo where nightmare spirits of darkness dwell. You must help me. I must return to the fields ere I perish for all eternity. Help me, Akikuyu. Give me sweet liberty.
She considered his entreaty, then shook her head.
No,
she answered plainly.
Akikuyu is mad. You're not there. She imagined all this, so shut up. What proof do you need, woman?
Demanded Nicodemus.
You must release me. Ah, so you say, said Madame Akikuyu. But how is this to be? Akikuyu have no great magics to work for you. She know only herbs and medicines. But I can teach you, Akikuyu. All the forces of nature are mine to command. You could learn from me secret knowledge known to none of your kind. Just think of it.
Madame Akikuyu thought hard. A yearning awoke inside her. It seemed to be a very old feeling, nudged to the surface by Nicodemus's promises. Magical power, he would give her that. The hunger for it which welled up inside her felt so new, yet strangely familiar. You could be a queen, Akikuyu, mighty above all others. Madame Akikuyu woke from the illusions he was weaving about her.
Tach! She snorted. Akikuyu not to believe in the magic. Power of herb, yes. And rule of fight, yes. But not magic, tricks and tomfool nonsense.
The face on her ear screwed itself up with impatience. Do you want a demonstration? Very well.
Look down there, at the bottom of the ditch.
There, lying on the stones where Mr. Nettle had thrown it, were the remains of Audrey's corn dolly. It was in 4 pieces, the head and arms torn from the dress section.
Straw lady bust, she said aloud. Then join it together, Akikuyu. Put the head and the arms where they belong, and I shall do the rest.
Madame Akikuyu arranged the arms and head around the body.
Now, said Nicodemus, with the bone from your hair, draw a triangle around it. Good. Now, throw open your arms to the night and repeat after me. Only make sure you do it exactly.
They began the invocation to the unseen spirits of the world.
Come, blood. By slaughterous cold and searing ice I call thee. Come out of the shadows, awake from your empty tomb, and walk amongst us. I entreat thee, make whole again your effigy.
Madame Akikuyu repeated all the words, and watched the corn dolly in fascinated silence. All around them the grasses and leaves began to stir and rustle, beating against each other like applause. Inside the triangle, the moss that grew over the stones writhed like angry maggots, and burst open new shoots like green fireworks. Everything living within that area grew and bloomed 1,000 times faster than normal. Then, as Madame Akikuyu stared in disbelief, the severed stems of the corn dolly's grain arms twisted and coiled into the body section.
The plaited head put out a tentative, wiry tendril, like a bather testing the water, then rooted itself onto the shoulders.
Ah!
Squealed Madame Akikuyu.
Dummy repaired!
Quite, said the tattoo matter-of-factly. Are you convinced now, Akikuyu? The rat nodded quickly.
Oh, yes, Nicodemus, my friend, you're here. Akikuyu, not bonkers.
She hugged herself as she gazed at the completed figure of straw. Hear me, O brood, called out Nicodemus. Give this image life, pour breath into its empty breast, and let stems be as sinew. A shadow passed over the sky, thundering from the empty night on the back of the wind. The treetops swayed and the leaves whipped around. The grass in the meadow parted as the force fell upon it and travelled through, flattening and battering everything in its path. It rushed towards the ditch and went howling into it. Madame Akikuyu stood her ground as the unseen fury tore at her hair and pulled her shawl till it choked her. Then all was still. The fortune-teller lowered the claws she had raised against the ravaging gale and looked down at the dolly. "Command it," said Nicodemus.
I?
She stammered. "Who else? It will obey none but you." Madame Akikuyu swept back the hair which had blown over her face and peered at the corn dolly.
Up?
She ordered meekly. One of the grain arms gave a sudden twitch, and the rat drew her breath sharply. "Up," she said again with more force. The straw figure flipped itself over, rustling and crackling. It leant on its arm and jolted itself up until it stood before her. "Instruct it to bow," suggested Nicodemus.
Bow?
Said the rat. With a snapping and splintering, the corn dolly bent over and bowed. "Hee-hee!" cackled Madame Akikuyu, jumping up and down, a tail waving around like an angry snake.
It moves! It moves! She called. And only for Akikuyu, for she alone.
"So," began Nicodemus in a pleased tone, "you must choose. Will you help me?"
Yes! Yes!
She crowed gladly. It was another baking hot day. Audrey awoke to a blazing blue sky empty of cloud. As soon as she had dressed and brushed away some stray bits of straw, she clambered out and descended the ladder Mr. Scuttle had made for her. On the ground below, Mrs. Scuttle had spread a clean cloth and laid out breakfast. Arthur was well into his third helping.
"Morning, missy," greeted Elijah. "And how did you sleep last night?"
"Very well, Mr. Scuttle, thank you." Mrs. Scuttle patted the cloth by her side and said,
You sit down here, dear, and tell me what you think you will be doing today.
The sun was climbing higher in the brilliant sky. "Is there somewhere cool I could go to, Mrs. Scuttle?" Mrs. Scuttle tutted and scolded herself. "Why, there I go forgetting myself again. When I first came here, I was as limp as a lettuce for weeks. House mice aren't used to all this sunshine. The best place I used to go to when I felt a bit off with the heat was the still pool. Just follow the ditch and you can't miss it." After her breakfast, Audrey set off. Just as she left the hall, she walked straight into Jenkin Nettle. "Hello, miss," he grinned. "Oh," muttered Audrey, blushing. "Good morning, Jenkin." "You looks nice this morning, miss," he said, enjoying the situation. Audrey giggled and thanked him. She sauntered out of the field with Jenkin's eyes following her admiringly. Making her way along the ditch, she noticed that its floor began to get softer. Instead of dry, choking dust, it had become a rich brown mud. Soon her footprints began to fill up with water. She pushed through the trailing leaves of an ivy creeper and found herself staring into the still pool. It was as if she had crossed the threshold into another world, a cool, silent place where magic was almost visible. The edge of the pool was fringed with plants. Water plantains, horsetails, and yellow rattles grew here. Behind one clump, a husky voice began to speak.
Alison Sedge, you are the loveliest thing in creation.
Audrey looked up, startled.
You are lovelier than the flowers in your hair. Just look at you. That hair. The goddess would be proud of it.
Audrey put her paw over her mouth. She wanted to laugh.
Those eyes, they're luscious, they are. A boy could drown in those.
Audrey crept round the plants to see who it was.
Those lips! Don't you want to eat them up, lads? A finer cherry-red pair of lips than ever were. Won't someone peck them?
Now there came a sound of pretended kissing. Through the leaves, Audrey saw Alison Sedge. She was gazing at herself in the water, enchanted by her own reflection. Audrey decided that it was rude to stay there without letting the mooning field mouse know that she was there, so she coughed politely. Alison Sedge whipped round and stared in horror, embarrassment, shame, and surprise, registering in her beautiful eyes.
I'm sorry for intruding, said Audrey. I'm Audrey Brown, a friend of Twit. I don't think we've met.
And then she remembered this was the girl who had glared at her. She gave her tail a slight flick. The silver bells on it tinkled sweetly. Alison jumped in surprise and stared at them coldly. Then she smiled and fiddled abstractedly with her mouse-brass. It tinkled too. Maybe not as sweetly, but it was enough to draw Audrey's eyes to it. She recognized the sign of grace and beauty and rolled her eyes heavenward.
You're not old enough to have a brass, then? Queried Alison.
I did have one, said Audrey, but I lost it.
Oh, careless, the other observed coolly.
Audrey did not feel like explaining about the altar of Jupiter. In an innocent voice, she said, That Jenkins a nice boy, isn't he? Alison scowled. Through clenched teeth, she managed to say,
The nettles are all balmy. I'd have nought to do with them.
Oh, I don't know, sighed Audrey demurely.
Jenkin is always sweet to me.
He's like that to all the common sort, spat Alison. I had to tell him to stop pestering me.
Audrey held out her paw to examine her nails, something she never did usually.
Said I looked nice this morning. Always calls me miss.
Alison pursed her lips, and then her eyebrows arched craftily, and she said,
His dad's loony, too. Wonder how he knew about your daft dolly, though.
Audrey understood at once, and for her the game ended.
Can be dangerous living in the country if when you're not used to it, droned Alison, and try and take what don't belong to you.
Oh, I'm quite safe, said Audrey defiantly. You see, I don't scare easily. And if I come across a snake, I don't run away.
Really? You get bitten then?
Oh, no, Audrey assured her. You see, Madame Akikuyu and I are best friends. I'd get some of her potions and shrivel that snake up. She brought her face close to Alison's and added darkly, Either that, or I'd choke it with my bare paws just for the fun of it. Alison backed away. She did not like the look in Audrey's eyes. She tossed her head and said,
I can't waste my time here all day.
Yes, smiled Audrey. I saw you not wasting your time before. Alison huffed and flounced off. Audrey lay back and enjoyed the tranquil magic of the pool in peace. The morning turned to lunchtime. Arthur's stomach began to growl, and he went in search of food. A narrow path veered away from the main corridor, and he wondered if it was a short cut to the hall. It seemed to go in the right direction, so he took it. Then he stopped in his tracks. Something was wrong. He could feel it. "Oh, no," he muttered, and ran over to a dark, lumpy shape which sprawled awkwardly over the ground. At his feet was the body of a mouse. For a couple of moments, Arthur could only stand and gape, shock freezing his limbs. Gingerly, he turned the body over and squealed in fright. It was Hodge. Hodge's eyes were popping out, and the mouth was fixed in a wild and silent scream. Arthur could see savage marks on his throat, and his neck looked pathetically thin and squashed. Slowly it dawned on him. Hodge had died of strangulation. Arthur gulped and gazed round fearfully. What if the murderer was still there somewhere, hiding and watching him? "I've got to get out," he squeaked, and ran up the path again, stumbling and falling in his haste. Twit had told him of the Fennywold alarm call, and now he shouted it desperately. "Fenny! Fenny!" he cried. A grim, silent group made its way to the Hall of Corn. Mr. Woodruff held up his staff of office and cried, "What creature's done this? We must not rest until this fiend is captured. Summon everyone into the hall at once." Soon everyone was there, except for Audrey. The hall was buzzing with grief and anger as the mice held on to their children tightly and called for the murderer to be found. Isaac Nettle turned to the king furiously.
See?
He raged bitterly.
Now do you see what happens when you turn your back on the Green's holy laws? He has been swift to show his anger.
"Silence, Nettle," stormed Mr. Woodruff. "I will not have you say such rubbish."
We must all pray hard, and beg the Green's forgiveness for having allowed the heathen into our midst.
He whirled round and pointed an accusing finger at Arthur.
Where is thy sister, the blasphemer?
Akikuyu strode into the room.
What goes on?
She asked.
Who make all the noise and all the balloo? They wake Akikuyu.
And then she saw Hodge's body and tutted sadly.
Ah, poor mouselet. He is beyond Akikuyu's help.
He was strangled, said Mr. Woodruff gently.
Who did so?
She asked in astonishment.
I give them a throttling.
Alison Sedge watched everything in horror. She could not take her eyes off the body. That lifeless thing had once been a boy she had flirted with and lured into the meadow. Now the thought of it made her ill. She stumbled to her nest and bit her nails nervously. A dreadful thought had come to her. She recalled Audrey's words at the still pool. I'd choke it with my bare paws for the fun of it. In the warm, misty dawn, Madame Akikuyu waded through the deep leaf piles near the oaks. Her bag was stuffed full with fresh herbs and wild flowers, the ingredients for a special potion. Nicodemus had instructed her to collect them the night before. She surveyed the leafy world around her and spotted some strange, chalky-looking objects scattered about the base of one of the oaks. She mumbled, prodding one with her claw. It was grey and dry and broke open at her touch.
Hooty cough-ups,
she remarked with disdain. They were owl pellets, tight little bundles of bone and fur that had been swallowed greedily by the owl as he devoured his prey, only to be regurgitated later when he had been unable to digest them.
"So Owlie's still here," muttered the fortune-teller.
She looked up at the trunk of the tree and saw the dark hole in it.
"Just you stay away from my mouses,"
She threatened, shaking her fists.
"or Akikuyu come pluck you again."
Young Wortle was making his way through the field in the morning mist when something moved in the corner of his eye.
"Hello,"
he called brightly.
"Someone there, then?"
There was no reply, only the rustle of the corn stems. Young Wortle shrugged and put the movement down to the swirl of the mist. He set off again and began to whistle the tune that Hodge had taught him. The tune died on his lips as he remembered his dear friend. Something rustled behind him, and it wasn't just the corn stems. Young Wortle walked a little faster. What if it was something horrible waiting for him with long, sharp teeth and pointed claws? Young Wortle shivered. The rustling sounded again, only this time it was on his left. He yelped and stared wildly around him, and suddenly he broke into a wild, panic-stricken run, deeper and deeper into the field, not caring where he went, just so long as he was away from the horror. He crashed headlong through the dense stems, squealing out loud. Sharp stones bit into his pink feet until they bled, and coarse leaves razored through his paws.
"Oh, no," he whimpered. "I can't go on much further."
His legs crumbled beneath him, and young Wortle lay panting on the hard ground. He was a small, frightened animal, totally alone. Even when the owl had been after him, he had known what he had been up against. But this was different. Here the danger hid out of sight, waiting to strike when its victim least expected. He strained his ears for some minutes, but could hear nothing. He got to his feet, his legs still a bit wobbly. He scratched the top of his head and tugged the little tuft of hair that grew there. And then he froze. Thin, long fingers appeared out of the mist and came for him. As he yelled for his life, he felt something tighten around his neck.
"Fanny!"
He screamed desperately.
"Feather!"
Only the corn stems rustled in reply. Audrey lay in her nest, staring at the starry sky. She wondered how much longer she could go on living at Fennywold if the hostile atmosphere continued. Her thoughts were interrupted by a small, polite voice whispering under the nest entrance.
"Miss Brown?"
it said.
"Who is it?"
She whispered back.
"It's me, Jenkin."
"Oh!" Audrey was surprised.
"What do you want?" "To talk to you. Meet me down here when you're ready."
Quickly she pulled on her clothes and tied up her hair with her best ribbon. What could Jenkin want at this time of night? She climbed down the ladder. His eyes lit up when he saw her. "You always do look nice," he said.
"Oh, thank you,"
she blushed. "What is it you want?" Jenkin looked around furtively.
"I can't tell you here," he said shyly. "Can we go somewhere, bit private, like?"
"Yeah, all right," she consented, extremely curious. Jenkin led her out of the hall of corn by a small side entrance. "Why all this secrecy?" she asked him.
"Oh, it's my dad forbid me to see you," came the reply.
"He says you're a town heathen who don't know good from bad."
Audrey felt herself near to exploding.
"Well, if that's all you've got to tell me, I might as well go back now."
To her astonishment, he laughed. Not an unkind, mocking laugh, but a gentle, good-humoured chuckle.
"Oh, no, don't go yet. Not till I've had my say."
Look, we're all right here now. There ain't no one to listen.
The moonlight fell on his fine hair, and for the first time Audrey noticed that he had combed it. He swallowed hard and began. "I told you what my dad thinks," he lumbered on awkwardly, "'cause that don't matter to me no more. I'm never going back to him or our winter quarters. I've left. Tomorrow I shall start to building a nest round the hall. Well, what I'm saying, Miss Brown, Audrey, is, well, I'd like you to share that nest with me, 'cause I loves you and wants to wed you." And that is the end of side 3. Audrey was bewildered. The proposal of marriage was the last thing she had expected, and it took some time for it to properly sink in. "What, you really want to marry me?" "More than anything, and that's the green honest truth." He watched her intently with wide, trusting eyes like a baby. Audrey's heart went out to him. The plain truth was that she did not love him, but a strong desire to see Piccadilly again grew in her. She took his paw in hers. "Oh, Jenkin, I'm sorry. I don't want to hurt your feelings, but I can't accept. I'm extremely flattered, but no, you see, I know now that I love another, and I never realized it before." Jenkin hung his head. "Have I made a fool of myself?" Audrey smiled. "Not at all. It's nice to know that not everyone in Fennywold thinks I'm a monster." But as she said it, the hairs on the back of her neck tingled. Suddenly the corn stems were thrust aside, and something crashed towards them. Audrey could not believe her eyes, and Jenkin fell back in fear. The corn dolly she had made was lurching towards them. No longer was it the neat, trim figure she had woven, but a mass of tangled, twisted stems, bent with hatred and evil spells. The arms which had been pretty corn ears had grown long and wild, with spiky fingers which clutched at the air greedily. Jenkin grabbed Audrey's paw and dragged her away. "Come on!" he yelled. They stumbled off through the field, the figure pursuing them closely. It scraped its untidy skirt over the stony ground and flayed the air with its thin arms, groping for them. Its plaited loop head, twisting from side to side, seemed to sense rather than see where it was going. Jenkin and Audrey ran in blind terror, with the papery crackling sound rustling close behind. She slipped, and quick straw fingers grasped at her heels. "Ah!" she squealed, as they dragged her back, and the figure loomed over her, lowering its plaited loop purposefully. Jenkin beat the straw with his fists, and the fingers released Audrey and grabbed him. The loop slipped over his head, but he ducked and nipped off with Audrey. "Not far to go," he called, "until we're out of the field. Then we should be able to go faster." Audrey leapt over stones and dodged the stems which blocked her path. Her tail bells jangled wildly as the clutching fingers searched for her. The corn dolly raised its spindly arms and brought them knifing down. Audrey felt herself jerked backwards. Jenkin had hold of her, and he carried her clear of the field. "Look, Jenkin," she gasped. "It isn't following us." Jenkin put her down and stared back. The corn dolly stayed within the confines of the field, its arms upraised. "Why isn't it chasing us?" asked Jenkin nervously. He frowned. The thing seemed to be waiting for something to happen. It reared back the loop head as though sensing another presence. Jenkin moved his eyes from the straw figure up to the tops of the dark elms and out into the starry sky. "Get down!" he yelled, and roughly pushed Audrey to the ground. It was too late to save himself. A pale, silent ghost slipped out of the night sky and snatched him up. Jenkin squeaked in pain as Mahout scooped him up in his vicious talons. Audrey saw the owl swoop into the darkness over the meadow and heard Jenkins' frightened voice fade away. And then Audrey began to scream. The corn dolly rustled its pleasure and slunk back into the shadowy cover of the field. Soon everyone in Fennywold was awake and lighting torches. And when they found her, Audrey was staring across the meadow with big, dark eyes that were dreadful to look on. Arthur shook her to stop the piercing screams. "What is it, Aud?" he asked wildly. Without seeing him, she pointed out into the sky and said, "The owl! The owl has got Jenkin!" The field mice cried out in dismay, but from their midst one figure stepped forward into the circle of torchlight. It was Jenkin's father. His face trembled with emotion, and his lips turned white. "Jenkin, lad," he said, sounding as if he had been stabbed. He turned on Audrey, and his eyes burned at her accusingly. He raised a quivering finger and pointed. "You have done this! You!" Before she could reply, out of the crowd stepped Madame Akikuyu. The rat took a torch from one of the field mice and held it above her head. "So!" she shouted, and all looked to her. "Mousy got by Owly! What you do?" "What can we do?" asked Arthur bitterly. "Go fight the mangy bird!" she cried, whirling the torch around. "Come, mousies! We go to save him!" The field mice cheered her as she led them down the banks of the ditch like a general. Mr. Nettle followed like a sleepwalker. "Arthur," Audrey whispered to her brother, "Jenkin and I were chased out here by a terrible thing. It was my own corn dolly. Arthur, it must have killed Hodge. It tried to kill us too. What can I do?" Arthur gulped. "Look," he said, "don't mention this to anyone yet. You're in enough trouble already. What do you think they'll do if they find out your figures come to life and murders people?" They hurried after the lights of the rescue party. In the empty glade near the field, only one mouse was left. It was Alison Sedge. She watched the torchlight dwindle in the distance and shook her head. Her sobs were silent and her heart broken. She ripped off her mouse brass and flung it away. Madame Akikuyu led the field mice through the dark meadow. She began to climb the tree. "I get you, Hooty!" she snarled angrily. "I tell you, leave my mouses be!" She pulled herself up to the hole in the trunk and announced herself. "Hooty, Akikuyu here again." "Who?" came a hollow voice. "Akikuyu, the owl rider and neck plucker. I have mattress need stuffing." She laughed and pulled the bone from her hair. Sounds of agitated scrabbling issued from the black recess. Mahout was trapped, and he knew it. "Ah!" bawled Akikuyu, springing across the threshold and stabbing the bone in front of her. Mahout darted forward, but she brought the bone crashing down on his open beak. It crunched and chipped, and Mahout hooted in agony. In a foul temper, he shot out a deadly talon and snapped it tight around the fortune-teller's neck. "Not so fast, Hooty!" she yelled, and kicked the owl in the stomach. "Oof!" moaned Mahout, as the air rushed out of him, and he collapsed wheezing on the floor. Madame Akikuyu shrieked with laughter, and the owl lunged at her in a mad rage. He knocked her off balance, so that she stumbled and fell backwards. Then Mahout beat her down with his powerful wings until she was overwhelmed by his feathery bulk. She thrashed her tail from left to right, so he bit it, and the blood oozed out. Madame Akikuyu gnashed her teeth and managed to pull an arm loose. With one swipe, she punched Mahout savagely under his beak. He staggered backwards, and she was free. Nimbly she stepped out of the dark hole and ran along the branch outside.
Nah, nah, she taunted him, waggling her bottom at the hole. Come out, Hooty! Akikuyu thrash you good and proper. In a cloud of white feathers, Mahout left the hole. He spread out his wings and reared himself up to a towering height.
Die!
He boomed. Ah ha ha! Chuckled the fortune-teller. Not yet, Owlie. She slipped her claw swiftly into the bag slung over her shoulder and pulled out a small cloth pouch. Mahout made a ravaging dive at her. The rat flung the pouch at him, and the poisonous concoction exploded in his face. She smartly stepped to one side as Mahout floundered past. His eyes were stinging, and he could not see. The smell of burnt feathers fouled the air.
Oh!
He screeched in panic as he fumbled along the branch.
Mahout is blind! Oh!
Madame Akikuyu poked and teased him until he could bear this monstrous rat woman no longer. He flapped his wings and rose shakily in the air. The fortune-teller let him go unmolested. Mahout spiraled around, unable to see where he was going, and with a dull thud, which smashed more of his beak, he flew into a tree trunk, and then fell to the ground, bouncing off the branches. "A fine sight to see," said a voice in the fortune-teller's ear. "What a darling you are, the darling of Fennywold. But come, for it is time you learned of the spell which will release me." "Wait," said Madame Akikuyu, as she remembered Jenkin. "I have Mousie to find." "The lad is dead," said Nicodemus coldly. As Mahout came crashing down out of the high branches, the field mice who were waiting below cheered wildly and rushed forward.
Stop, wait!
ordered Mr. Woodruff. But they surged past him like a river and began to hurl stones at the dazed owl and beat it with their sticks.
"Oh, this is obscene!"
shouted the king of the field. But they did not hear him. They only heard the gasps and cries of Mahout as they tore at him. In the owl's nest, Madame Akikuyu listened as Nicodemus began. "It is a mighty spell which we dare to attempt, Akikuyu. Are you brave enough for it?" "Yes, Nico." "Then this is what we need. You must build a fire and feed it with the herbs I shall tell you to gather. Around this fire you must say the words of release. At the time of the ceremony, however, I must be protected from the heat of the fire. I must project my essence to a place of safety. Look in your bag. There you will find a vessel suitable for me." Akikuyu rummaged around inside her bag until she found what Nicodemus meant. "You mean this great one?" she said, taking out her most prized possession. The moonlight curved lovingly over the smooth glass ball that the fortune-teller had brought with her from Deptford. "Excellent," he crooned delightedly. "That is most suitable. Have it with you at the fire's edge. Only remember, Akikuyu, that once the spell is complete, you must smash your prize to release me. I do not want to spend another age imprisoned in there." "I promise, Nico," she said with regret, as she stroked her beautiful crystal ball. "And one more thing, Akikuyu. There must be an exchange of souls, or the spell will be useless." "Souls?" The fortune-teller trembled. "What am I to do this time?" "There must be a sacrifice to the flame," Nicodemus whispered. "My essence will cross over to your world, and the soul must cross back in return.
We must cast into the fire one who is not protected by a mouse brass. Who you think of? She asked warily. The one who has abandoned you, Akikuyu. The one who spurned your friendship. No! Cried the rat in dismay. Yes, hissed Nicodemus. It must be her. You are sworn to obey me. Throw Audrey Brown into the fire. Oh, mouselet! Akikuyu wailed miserably.
Alison Sedge was restless. All day she had lain in the shade by the still pool, thinking of Jenkin. She remembered their happy days together before she had received her mouse brass. But that was gone now, and good riddance. She wore no flowers around her neck any more, and had not once gazed at her reflection. Her hair was forgotten and neglected in 2 untidy plaits. She had not eaten all day. Twilight came. Reluctantly, Alison picked herself up and ducked under the hawthorn branches. She passed over the ditch and into the field. The corn was silent. No wind rustled its ears or rattled its stems. Their long, dark shadows fell on her like the bars of a prison. She became increasingly uneasy and gulped nervously as she remembered the murderer that hid in here, throttling unwary mice who wandered around alone. A noise startled her. The corn moved behind, and a crackling rustle moved towards her. Alison did not wait to look. She ran deeper into the field towards the hall of corn, but the rustling grew louder. It was ahead of her now, and she could see dim shapes before her. Alison wheeled round and sped back towards the ditch, missing the path in her haste. Suddenly she tripped and stumbled. She put out her arms to save herself, but landed on something soft. Panting heavily, Alison lifted her face and stared into the blank eyes of young Wortle. She had fallen on top of his discarded body. Alison leapt up and screamed at the top of her voice. In the hall of corn, the field mice were once more disturbed by the alarm call. They lit their torches and fled out, fearing the worst. Then, crashing out of the field, came Alison Sedge. She ran to her mother's arms and squealed, "It's young Wortle! He's dead! I found his body in there!" Mr. and Mrs. Knepp held on to each other for support. "Where is he?" cried Mr. Knepp, preparing to enter the field. "No, don't go in there!" shouted Alison. "There's something after me! It nearly got me!" The field mice made angry noises and lifted their torches high above their heads. "We must find it," they declared. "We must put an end to this murder." Before any of them could move, there came a splintering and a rustling sound. Out of the field, silhouetted against the sky, was the evil corn dolly. Its looped head jerked from side to side as if it were sniffing the air. Then it began to advance stiffly towards them. The field mice gasped and staggered back in horror. "It's the doll thing," some of them muttered. "How is it moving like that? It is bewitched." "Where is that town mouse?" some others began to mutter, and the call was taken up by all of them. "Where's the town mouse? Where's the town mouse?" At the rear, Audrey held Twit's paw in terror. Out of the crowd, Mr. Knepp saw her and cried, "There she is! Bring her forward!" Feverish paws grabbed Audrey and pulled her away from Twit and the scuttles. Through the mass, she was dragged and shoved until she was pushed out in front of her creation. She tried to turn back, but angry paws and bodies barred her way. The corn dolly swept up to her and lowered its head again. Audrey screamed, "Stop! Stop!" The figure jerked up quickly and lowered its arms, and then, to her everlasting horror, it bowed before her and fell lifeless to the ground. The crowd stared at it with wide eyes, and then Mr. Knepp said,
it abide her.
Witch!
Hissed the mob.
Witch! Witch! Witch!
They circled round Audrey menacingly. Isaac Nettle came striding forward, booming,
The town mouse is a witch! She has insulted the green mouse by weaving idols and conjured spirits to give life to her hellish work. 3 of our folk have died because of her. What do we do with a witch? Burn her! Cried the crowd.
"No!" whimpered Audrey, as they tied her paws behind her back. "I'm not a witch!" But her voice was drowned out by the cries of the angry mice. Isaac picked up the motionless corn dolly and cast it down into the ditch. Then he hurled a blazing torch after it, and the figure immediately burst into flames. The loop head blackened and withered into a wisp of oily smoke. The field mice pushed Audrey to the edge of the ditch, and the glowing ashes rose up and curled round her ankles. "Burn! Burn!" they repeated excitedly. 2 strong husbands lifted her up and swung her out over the flames. Madame Akikuyu covered her face with her claws and trembled. Nicodemus laughed triumphantly.
Stop this!
Mr. Woodruff wrestled forward angrily.
You must all stop this!
He pulled Audrey out of the mice's paws. Isaac thundered in and whirled Mr. Woodruff round.
Go back to your nest, Woodruff! Let us do what must be done. The witch must die.
"But you can't burn her, Isaac," he appealed to the crowd.
Surely you cannot have sunk so low as to allow this. Never has a mouse been burned in Fennywold.
Isaac snarled and yanked Audrey from Mr. Woodruff's grip.
Then she shall hang, he proclaimed. Let her choke, just as her creature choked Hodge and young Wattle.
He signalled to the crowd, and they swarmed along the ditch, with him at their head and Audrey stumbling at his side. Twit had never felt so useless in all his life. He was too small to do anything useful. Suddenly he gasped.
Could I? He asked himself. Would it work?
He rushed forward. At the yew tree, a tight circle of mice had formed. In the centre were Mr. Nettle and Audrey. Her wide eyes were rolling in terror, and their whites were showing. A straw rope had been slung over the hanging branch, and a noose had been tied in one end.
Quickly, Akikuyu, said Nicodemus. The girl must not die by hanging. She must be alive when the flames take her.
Yelps and squeals broke out of the crowd, and the mice jumped as something bit and clawed its way through. It was Twit. He didn't care how he got past. He ran into the ring, and before anyone could stop him, he had slipped the rope from Audrey's throat.
Leave her be!
Roared Isaac, looming over him with his paw raised. A smouldering green fire seemed to issue from Twit's eyes, and Isaac faltered. I come to claim her, Twit shouted at the top of his voice. I claim her in the name of the Green.
How dare you blaspheme,
growled Mr. Nettle.
She is for the noose.
Do you forget your own laws, Nettle? Twit barked back at him.
What laws?
The law of the gallows, snarled Twit. If a willing spouse can be found beneath the hanging tree, then the accused, whatever the crime, will be reprieved.
A spouse,
mocked Isaac.
Who would marry a witch?
I will, said Twit proudly. I invoke the law and offer my paw in marriage to Audrey Brown. The crowd murmured. There was no getting away from it. If Twit married Audrey, then she could not be hanged. No, cried Mr. Knepp as he sensed their doubt. We cannot let her go unpunished. My son is dead. It was Isaac who answered him.
Silence, Knepp. The way has been shown, though it grieves me
no less than you. We must obey the law, or we ourselves are guilty. But hear me. Tomorrow we shall drive Twit and the witch to our borders and banish them. Then if any find them crossing our lands, they have the right to do with them as they see fit. They are outcasts.
He turned back to Twit and Audrey.
Kneel ye, he ordered, and humble yourselves before the green mouse.
Audrey felt someone cut the ropes which bit into her wrists, and she dropped to her knees beside Twit.
Dost thou, William Scuttle, take unto thyself this mouse, Audrey Brown, to cherish through a winter and revel with in the summer, forswearing all others until the grass grows green over you both?
I does, said Twit.
Dost thou, Audrey Brown, intoned Isaac bitterly, take unto thyself this mouse, William Scuttle, to cherish through the winter and revel with in the summer, forswearing all others until the grass grows green over you both?
Audrey tearfully thought of Piccadilly. Sobbing, she uttered, I do.
May the mighty green join these two together through winter, harvest, youth, and age. Let no creature come between them, for now they are under the green's great mantle.
He sucked his teeth and said,
Rise, Scuttle, and scuttle.
You better be gone before midday tomorrow,
shouted Mr. Knepp,
or I swear I'll hail you both into the fire myself.
The crowd began to disperse and drift back into the field. Madame Akikuyu came and knelt before her friend and said tenderly,
May his mighty greenness bless and protect you for always. And may you forgive Akikuyu. Remember that she loves you and wants you to be happy in the summer light. It's all I ever wanted, my mouselet.
She leaned over to kiss Audrey's forehead. Twit's parents rushed forward and hugged their son and daughter-in-law. Mrs. Scuttle was tearful, but Elijah was proud.
There's another Mr. and Mrs. Scuttle round here now, he beamed.
Not for long, though, Dad, said Twit. Ord may be my wife, but I don't expect her to stay with me. He turned to the new Mrs. Scuttle and said softly, It's all right, Ord. I know you aren't keen on me in that way, so perhaps it's best if you go home tomorrow, eh? What about you, Twit? Audrey asked. And I can't go home anyway. What about Oswald and the Star Wife's bargain? Let's go and have something to eat, suggested Arthur. Then we can decide what to do. Under the yew tree, Madame Akikuyu stood alone.
You fool, rebuked Nicodemus. You interfering cretin. We might have had the girl if you had not blessed her. My plans are ruined now. The forces I spent on controlling the creature of straw have been wasted. Audrey Brown has been tied to the green laws. The spell cannot work. It needs a female sacrifice, one who is of age but has no mouse brass. Am I to be marooned in the abyss till the end of time?
Madame Akikuyu stared out along the bank. There sat Alison Sedge, miserable and dejected. No mouse brass hung from her neck.
Nico,
she whispered.
Akikuyu, find another.
The tattoo stared out and grinned.
Excellent. We shall perform the ritual tonight. Prepare the girl for sacrifice.
Alison Sedge kicked the tufts of dry, scruffy grass and turned to follow the others back into the field.
Hoi, Mousie, wait for I.
The rat's voice startled her. What you want? she asked rudely. The fortune-teller approached, smiling sweetly.
Let me help poor Mousie,
she said. What do you mean? Alison snapped.
I have spells, Mousie. Bring disaster on your enemies.
What enemies? Asked Alison stubbornly. The rat moved closer.
Those who rob you of suitors. Those who get in your way, sweet Mousie. Jumped-up girls not as pretty as you.
You mean the town mouse? She interrupted.
Yes. She put spell on Janky boy to make him fall for her. She led him into open and let Mahout make him owlbait.
Alison exploded with rage.
Is this true?
Well, I ought to go and tear her apart. I knew my Jenkin didn't really fancy her. Tell me what I can do.
Akikuyo will cast the spell. You help go get wood for bonfire.
Alison hurriedly ran to collect some sticks.
Well, Nico,
the rat began,
what do you think? She is perfect, Akikuyo,
gloated the voice.
Did you feel her spite and anger? They are strong, raw emotions. Her life essence will be most eagerly received by the gatekeepers of the abyss. Tonight, I shall be free again.
Akikuyu cleared a space on the high bank. She gathered some stones and arranged them in a circle, leaving it incomplete so that she could enter. She waited for Alison to return, and then, once all the wood they needed was within, she sealed the ring with them inside.
Now, Mousie, she said, we must not break through the stones till spell complete.
She began to build the bonfire. Then around it she sprinkled the magical herbs and flowers that she had carefully gathered at night. At last she stood back and admired her handiwork. It was a tall pyramid of dry branches and twigs. "Light it," urged Alison. "Cast your spell." Nicodemus chuckled to himself.
"Give her the crystal,"
he muttered to Akikuyu. The rat brought from her bag the glass globe and caressed it lovingly with her claws.
"Stand there and hold this," she told Alison.
Alison took the smooth globe in her palms and gazed at it. What a marvellous, mysterious object! How lovely it was with those swirls of colour in its centre.
"What is it?"
she gasped.
"It is my delight, my peace,"
Akikuyu replied sadly.
"And soon it must smash."
"Will you light the fire now?" asked Alison impatiently. Akikuyu nodded.
"Yes, I light fire, but first my Nico must be safe from heat."
"Nico?" asked Alison suspiciously. "Who is Nico?"
"I am Nicodemus!"
cried the tattoo triumphantly. Alison whirled around and then stepped back in alarm. "The face! The face on your ear, it moved! It spoke!" Nicodemus mocked her.
"I move, I speak. Ha ha ha!"
Alison had had enough. She turned and tried to run from the circle of stones, but a wall of invisible force prevented her escape. She howled in dismay, but Nicodemus laughed all the more.
"Mousie, not leave now. Ring complete," tutted Akikuyu. "You not listen, Mousie. Now, Nico, we must begin, yes?"
"Truly," said the voice, still chuckling, as Alison twisted and turned round the circle in vain.
"I shall project my presence into the heart of your crystal. There shall I be safe from the heat of the fire."
The tattoo screwed up its ugly face and became quite still. A black cloud moved over the stars. Alison stared at the crystal in her paws and saw a pinprick of cold blue light glimmer there. Slowly it began to pulse. The light grew and filled the globe until the crystal shone like a star fallen to earth. The glass became freezing to the touch, yet Alison could not let it go. Breathlessly and with great difficulty, the voice spoke again. It was nearer, yet somehow it echoed hollowly.
"Quickly, Akikuyu!"
it said with an effort.
"Light the fire now!"
Akikuyu lit the bonfire. The wood was so dry that it kindled easily, and soon the flames leapt up greedily. The heat scorched Alison's face, but the crystal remained icy to the touch.
"Hear me, Arash and Iriel!"
cried Nicodemus.
"I send you a soul in my stead, a female unprotected by the green laws. Accept her and let me go free."
A deep rumble boomed in the night. Thunder was approaching. On the horizon, fingers of lightning zigzagged down between heaven and earth. A freezing gale blew up, but protected by the circle of stones, the bonfire remained unaffected. Madame Akikuyu threw some powders into the blaze, and a ball of blue flame burst into the darkening sky.
"Prepare the vessel, Rameth, so I might live again!"
Nicodemus screamed above the clamoring storm. Akikuyu winced and clutched her stomach. Something was happening to her, something dreadful. She doubled over in agony, and as she did so, she caught sight of her own body and cried out in horror. Her fur was changing colour. Instead of being a sleek coat of black, it was now a bright marmalade orange with dark stripes. The secret, closed doors of her mind were forced open, and she bellowed with fear as she remembered the past and saw through Nicodemus's disguise. Nicodemus laughed amid the thunder and crowed his triumph with insane jubilation.
"Yes, Akikuyu, it is I, your master returned. Jupiter has come back from eternity." "No!" she yammered. "You, Nicodemus, spirit of field, Jupiter dead!" "Ah! I am the father of lies, Akikuyu. You know that. You have helped to release me. I shall not forget. I intend to reward you with the highest honor that is mine to give. You shall be the new host for my dark spirit." "No!"
Akikuyu tore at her hair and tried to flee, but like Alison she could not break out of the stone circle. Her eyes stung and their black orbs trembled. A thin film of gold closed over them until only narrow slits were left. Her ears were pulled out of shape, and she felt her tail grow thick, stripy fur. Jupiter's evil spells were changing her into a cat. She threw open her mouth to scream, but all that came out was a pitiful
"Meow." "Now, Akikuyu, throw the girl into the fire, then smash the globe."
The rat's feet dragged themselves towards Alison. The mouse had witnessed everything with incredulous despair. She cried for pity as the striped ginger rat lurched towards her. But there was nowhere to escape.
"Throw her in, Akikuyu!"
Madame Akikuyu blinked her tawny eyes and took hold of the mouse.
"Please, please!"
begged Alison as the rat pulled her towards the flames. The lightning flashed and crackled overhead. Thunder shook the ground, and Jupiter laughed.
"Please don't throw me in!"
pleaded Alison.
Please have pity on me.
With her golden eyes, it seemed to Akikuyu that for a moment Audrey stood before her.
Mouselet, she said. Go! Run free! I can't,
Alison wailed. Madame Akikuyu thought of the eternal torment that lay before her should Jupiter take possession of her body. She let go of Alison and shouted,
Mouselet, my friend, it is I who have choice. I will not serve you again. Akikuyu is free.
With one terrific leap, Madame Akikuyu cast herself into the middle of the fire. A bolt of lightning struck the circle and blasted the stones apart. Alison dropped the crystal and fled through the gap, escaping into the field. The bonfire spluttered, the flames leapt higher, and the tumult of the storm drowned out Jupiter's voice, calling from the glowing crystal.
The sacrifice has been made, and they are satisfied. Release me, child, please me. I am Jupiter, Lord of all darkness. I command you to break open the globe.
Without his tattooed eyes, he could not see that there was no one to hear him. The bonfire toppled over and fell with a flurry of burning ashes on top of the crystal. Jupiter's furious cries were muffled. In the Hall of Corn, the field mice were mumbling and talking to each other in low voices. Some of them were repenting their hasty actions, whilst others were sorry the town mouse had got off so lightly. Suddenly a cry made everyone turn round. Alison Sedge burst in and shouted,
It's the rat woman! She's working for a devil! She's behind all this!
Thunder split the sky, and the clouds were rent apart. Heavy rain teemed down with torrential force. Audrey woke next morning to find Twit sitting by her side. The field mouse raised a pale face.
Akikuyu's dead. She burned in her own bonfire.
Audrey burst into tears.
Oh, Akikuyu, I'm sorry, she wept.
Twit patted her paw.
Well, leastways you're free of that bargain now, Aud. You can go home.
Yes,
she sniffed.
The bargain is over.
She stared at Twit and said,
But you're my husband now, Twit. I can't leave you.
Twit reassured her.
Now, don't be daft, Aud, he said. We both know I only married you to stop you getting hanged. I told her you don't have to stay. Go back to Deptford. It's where you belong.
And you?
Twit shrugged.
A field mouse belongs in a field, he told her. I'll stick around, provided my banishment's been lifted.
You know, whispered Audrey, you're not as cheeseless as folk make out, William Scuttle. You're a very wise mouse indeed. I'll miss you.
Arthur was upset at the thought of leaving. He had gained everyone's respect, and now they knew that Audrey was innocent. The mice had warmed to her, too. A veil seemed to have lifted, and they became the good-natured creatures they have always been. Finally the day dawned when it was time to leave. Audrey kissed Mr. and Mrs. Scuttle goodbye, and then it was time to say goodbye to Twit.
I'll miss you, William,
she said thickly, her eyes brimming with tears.
I'll never forget you.
See you, Aud,
he replied brightly, but the twinkle had left his eye.
Say hello to Oswald for me, and thank Thomas for his rum. Take care now.
I will. Goodbye.
She kissed her husband for the last time. Brother and sister set off. Twit tried to wipe the tears from his eyes, but they would not stop.
I did love 'ee, Aud, he whispered.
It was the last day of summer. Alison Sedge sat on the edge of the ditch, lost in thought. She no longer took great care of her appearance. Her hair needed brushing, and she let it fall in tangled, untidy knots over her face. Her dress was shabby. But why should she care? In her mind, she was with Jenkin. She turned the black thing over in her paws. She had found it buried in a pile of ashes and cinders. Her find was scorched, blackened, and pitted, but not broken. She raised the crystal of Madame Akikuyu up to the sun, but it was too black to allow her to see within. It was some months now since the town mice had left Fennywold. How fickle everyone was to begin liking that horrid girl after everything she had done. But no, it was the rat woman who had caused all the evil, wasn't it? Alison was confused. Her thoughts were really too full of Jenkin to dwell on other subjects for long. But there was something about this globe. It had something to do with... Oh, she could not remember any more.
Curse you, Audrey!
She spat and discarded the black sooty ball. It began to roll down the steep bank. Alison struggled to her feet and walked away. She did not hear the glass crack and smash on the sharp stones at the bottom of the ditch. Unwittingly, Alison had completed the spell. Whilst she dreamed of a time long before when she and Jenkin had been happy together, a hideous great shadow rose up from the ditch behind her. Jupiter soared into the sky, free at last from the crystal prison.